SOAL Night Live, number 14. Welcome to a special edition. Tonight we have a show devoted to a fantastic progressive rock festival that ran from 1999 to 2012 called NEARFest, which stands for the Northeast Art Rock Festival. It's held up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be chatting with my good friends Chad Hutchinson and Rob LaDuca in about 15 minutes. And then about a quarter till, we're going to have a number of different guests drop in, all of which played NEARFest at one time or another. So stick around. There's a lot of music to talk about tonight. And if you went to the festival, I think you're really going to like what you see here and probably bring back some memories that you hadn't thought about in a while. And if not, stick around anyway. I promise you it's going to be an interesting and often compelling night. So stick around. I don't know if you noticed, but I created a group this week for this show at Facebook. It is facebook.com/groups/SOAL Night Live, SOALNIGHTLIVE. So swing by and join the group and keep up to date on all the different shows that are coming up. We've got a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline this coming month. Some people that I have wanted to speak with for years, and looks like it's going to happen. And I'm excited about that. I'll tell you in a minute who is coming up. All right, I think I've got my links posted everywhere they need to be. There's one at the Facebook group, and there's one at Progressive Ears, which I guess I should talk about real quick. This is a really cool show tonight because it brings back a lot of memories. Let me go back a little, give you a little background. In 1999, I got online officially, and I spent most of my time originally at Yahoo because of their instant messenger. And I soon realized that they had different groups at Yahoo. And there were different ones for different prog bands I really liked, and including Yes and Genesis and King Crimson. So I joined them all. And after a few months of just talking about each band at each club, as they called them then, clubs, I decided to create a club for progressive rock where we could talk about all of these bands and a lot of newer ones that we didn't even know about at the time. At least I didn't. So we created a group called Progressive Ears. It was at Yahoo for about a year, and then we went to a standalone site. And I have to admit, this is the first time I'd ever been online. And it was really neat chatting with people from all over the world about some of my favorite music and learning a lot too. I met so many people that knew so much more about this genre than I ever even dreamed of. And over the years, I've gotten to know it quite well. But I have to admit, I was pretty much a noob that was just into the classic stuff, Yes and Rush and Genesis and King Crimson. There was a whole world awaiting me that I didn't even know about, honestly. So it was really exciting to talk with different people from all over the world. And it took off. It still exists to this day. ProgressiveEars.org is 20 years old, which blows my mind that something like that has endured this long. It just shows that, there was a niche that we needed to fill. We didn't even know we were filling it. And even to this day, a lot of folks prefer to hang out there versus Facebook. It's almost like a good break from Facebook. So I'm glad it continues to be of value to so many people. And I thank you all so much for spending the time with us for the past 20 years and helping spread the word about so many awesome bands and artists that, the world probably wouldn't have known about otherwise. So thank you all very much. That's awesome. Okay. So anyway, I digress. About 2000, a gentleman started posting about a festival in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania called NEARFest, NEARFEST, Northeast Art Rock Festival. And it turned out to be my old friend, or soon to be friend, Rob LaDuca. And he encouraged us to come to the festival that year. And, for a bunch of people that had been talking online but never met each other, this was the perfect opportunity. you know, and plus a whole weekend of music, you know, it's a win-win. I admit some of the bands I don't think we were even familiar with at the time. I don't think the headliners were Porcupine Tree, and I'm really having a hard time remembering who else was there, but we'll get to that in a minute. You know, the first year was kind of a thrill just to talk to people from Progressive Ears, but pretty quickly we got on board and had our butts in our seats the rest of the weekend, especially the following year and onward, because it turned out to be just this amazing variety of music. You know, it's not, you know, they have 10 bands usually over the weekend, all flown in from around the world, that many that could never play here. They'd never have the money or the ability to tour and come here, but they could be flown in for a special one-off performance for 1,000 people, which is a pretty special kind of event, you know. And it wasn't a typical festival in the sense that it was a bunch of sweaty people out in a field someplace looking at a stage. No, this was at a fine arts center at Lehigh University. So we're sitting there in air-conditioned comfort with amazing sound, and you know, what better way to see any band? It was great. And we quickly discovered that this festival was all about variety. It's like you're going to get 10 bands, but they're not all going to be the same. Some festivals are more, you know, stick in one genre or subgenre, as we should say. Some have been created just to do that. But NEARFest was always about adventure. It's about variety. It's like you might come expecting to see a few classic rock legends, and then also get turned on to 7 or 8 bands that you might not have heard of from all over the world, all kinds of music. You know, because progressive rock is this multifaceted thing. It isn't just a bunch of old bands that sound like Yes and Genesis. You know, that's one sliver of it, but there's so much more than that going on. You know, there's the avant-garde end of it, the Rio, and just to have a chance to see groups from all over the world under one roof, it was magic. It was awesome, and I'm so glad that I was able to attend for a number of years. And towards the end, I actually was asked to be on the staff. And it was a real pleasure to do that for a couple of years, basically helping the groups find their way to the green room, to the stage and back, go to the meet and greet, clear out the room, and, you know, bring in the next band. And, you know, we got to see groups like UK that year, and Mike Keneally Band. That's just the last year. Steve Hackett the previous year. So many good ones. So anyway, all right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get going with my vinyl suggestions today. Every week I suggest some vinyl that I have in my collection that you should have if you don't have already. Lots of great stuff. So this week my batch is all NEARFest related. So every band that's in this pile of records played NEARFest at one time or another, or a offshoot of it did. Okay, well, here we go. First in my pile today, here's a group that I believe played NEARFest in 2002, I think it was. This was one of the years that they went and did it in Trenton, New Jersey. And Caravan was on the bill. I believe it was the same day as Nectar. It might even have been right before them. I can't quite remember now. This is a really cool album of theirs. It's called Cunning Stunts. Yeah. And another group that we had the pleasure of hosting was Renaissance, with the legendary vocalist Annie Haslam. And she will be our guest tonight shortly. So stick around. Annie will be here soon. This is one of their biggies that is highly regarded. They all are, but this is, you know, a favorite of many. Scheherazade and Other Stories. So very good stuff there. And let me see what else I've got here. You remember the year that Keith Emerson played? Yes, he too played at NEARFest, including numbers from their exciting debut, which you probably have already. It's a classic rock staple. We also had Steve Hackett as our guest twice, once in Trenton and then another time in, back in Bethlehem. That's right, second to last year. And that particular one was really cool because he played a whole lot of Genesis, but it was kind of before he got on his Genesis Revisited kick that he's been doing for the past 10 years or so, which is fantastic. I highly suggest it. And this is his third solo album, highly suggested one called Spectral Mornings. The title track is beautiful. It's one of his greatest accomplishments. The opener, Every Day, is fantastic too. And Steve's one guy that kept the progressive angle going when it came to the music he made. If anybody carried the torch that Genesis had in the mid-70s onward, it's Steve. And he's very consistent, very prolific. He's put out over 20 albums. And I'm going to have an interview with him coming up in about 2 weeks. So if you have any questions for Steve, feel free to send me an instant message, and I will try and get your questions to him. So, all right. Another year, we had almost Gentle Giant. We had Three Friends, which is Gary Green's Gentle Giant group. And they played a set of nothing but their music, and it was absolutely fantastic, including Malcolm Mortimer, who is the drummer on this particular album, Three Friends, which is one of my favorites. And it was just amazing. I mean, I never thought I would see anything in the ballpark of Gentle Giant live. So that was compelling. And Gary's just like the nicest guy in progressive rock and the most soulful guitarist in progressive rock too, I gotta say. I think some of his peers were a little frou-frou at times, but he had a way of just laying into that wah-wah and playing these greasy blues licks that just added a lot of emotion to the proceedings. And that's what I love about that kind of dichotomy with Gentle Giant. This incredibly intricate music meets amazing grooves and amazing playing that's from the heart. And as if that isn't cool enough, my guest next Friday night, we're going to have a special edition where I'm going to do 2 shows next weekend. And Friday night, my guest is Gentle Giant vocalist Derek Shulman. I'm very excited to talk to him. They've got some new stuff cooking. I won't call it new Gentle Giant music, but it's getting there. And here's another one. This is a fantastic group we saw at NEARFest in 2002. It was the Nectar Reunion. I don't think they'd played together in many years. And NEARFest has the power to bring groups together that haven't in years. It gives them a darn good reason to. And that's what this was all about. And there were so many Nectar fans there. It was awesome, It was so good. I mean, they played I'll Remember the Future. They did Recycled, and they even had Larry Fast, who was on that album, who played with Peter Gabriel later, sit in with them because he was on the album. And he also is one of our guests tonight, along with Nectar bassist Mo Moore. So stick around. We're excited to talk to them. There's a new Nectar album out, and we're going to be talking a lot about that as well. And a couple others, like I mentioned, Larry, as you know, he played with Peter Gabriel on the first 4 Peter Gabriel albums, including this one, which they call Scratch. And this is kind of my favorites. It's kind of the least hailed of the 4, but for that reason, I love it all the more. Some of the tunes on here, like White Shadow and On the Air, are just some of his best. Awesome stuff. I believe Robert Fripp also produced this one. It's kind of a trilogy with Daryl Hall's Sacred Songs and Fripp's Exposure album. Those 3 and Scratch are kind of intertwined, in case you didn't know. And another favorite memory, seeing Camel. I think it was 2003, Andy Latimer. And we had Tom Brislin come into the fore at the last minute to play keys on that, and he knocked it out of the park. He's amazing. We did an episode with Tom about a month ago, so check our archives. He talks all about different things he's done playing with Yes and also playing with Kansas. He's now in Kansas, and he's on their new album, The Absence of Presence. And it's probably the most progressive, classic-sounding album that they've made in 20 years, maybe more. All righty, and one last one before I bring in the guys. UK, Eddie Jobson. We had a chance to see Eddie Jobson twice in like 2 years. Eddie Jobson had a super group he brought in the first year with Marco Miniman on drums and Mike Mancini, both a few months away from trying out for Dream Theater. And as you know, Mike got the slot. And deservedly so. He wanted it badly. And Marco had bigger fish to fry. It's nice that he was free to go do that. So I think everything worked out great for everybody in the long run. And Marco agrees. We actually talked about that a few weeks ago. So those are my suggestions. My vinyl confessions, as I call them. Okay, I'm going to bring the guys in just a minute. Thank you all for tuning in. You know, we are a weekly internet music talk show, and we talk a lot about progressive rock, but not just progressive rock. We have, you know, a lot of regular classic rock fans and guests from time to time as well. Well, as I mentioned, this is SOAL Night Live number 14. Tonight is called NEARFest Memories with my good friends Chad Hutchinson and Rob LaDuca. So without further ado, I'm going to bring the guys in here and we will reminisce for about a half an hour and then bring in the special guests.
Hey, Sean.
Hey. This is SOAL Night Live number 14. Good evening. Okay, I see you're floating above the earth there, Rob. That's awesome. You're in a relaxed pose. That's great.
Hey, dear, could you shine the light a little more?
Are you channeling your inner Jack Horkheimer?
Just keep looking up.
There you go, exactly, man. I know you wanted that jacket really bad. Did you ever get one?
I had it, dude.
Good.
I had a Silver's members only. No, turn.
I hear they're coming back.
Turn it. The bulb. There we go. Yeah, turn it a little more this way.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on. You know, it seems like NEARFest has been on a lot of people's minds lately, and you know, what better way than to do it up here?
I mean, hey, it's great.
Yeah, thank you both.
See you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What are you drinking, Chad?
Well, what do you mean? Why would you think I'm drinking?
Well, who would come to this party without a good beer? I mean, come on. There you go.
I've got a captain's daughter from Gray Sail Brewing in Westerly, Rhode Island.
Excellent. Well, I have a Dr. Pepper from Plano, Texas.
There you go.
Perfect.
I need to keep my wits about.
How I look fine.
You look interstellar. I like it. Well, so
You look like you're ready for a dentist appointment.
That's a great way to get the Rona.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I actually had to, right when the whole thing started, I knew that I needed a filling. And they wouldn't even answer the phone. So 2 months later, when they answered the phone, then I needed a root canal.
Let me.
And so, yeah, somehow I escaped the Rona, but I didn't escape a $3,000 bill for medical expenses, and I mean dental expenses.
Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Pepper. Oh, well.
Is that your addiction?
I guess so. I mean, if this is as bad as it gets, you know, whatever.
I've lost 60 pounds since November 1st.
I could stand to lose a few myself. And, you know, if I just left this shit alone, it'd probably drop off like water.
Yeah. If you quit soda, you'll drop 15 pounds before you know it.
I know it. I've tried a couple times and it just doesn't last too long. So anyway, well, cheers. Good to have you all here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I got people up to date on kind of what the festival is in my monologue. And I kind of wanted to go back and, you know, kind of get to the bottom of exactly how you guys met and what inspired the first one and what inspired the name.
Rob, why don't you start that off since you had that Prog Day background?
So I was working with Peter Renfro on Prog Day 98. I attended 97, had a great time, but I actually stayed in his house, and I remember him like that night going, oh man, I think I lost about $6,000. And, you know, his lady wasn't looking too pleased at him with that result either. And he's like, I don't know if I could do this again. So I'm like, hey, Peter, you know, if I started a fundraising campaign, how much would you need to commit to having Prog Day in 1998? And he goes, well, I lost about $6K. So if you could raise that, you know, if we do the same thing, I know I'll be short $6K. So I started contacting bands and got autographed CDs and put them up on eBay and stuff. And lo
So
and
Rob, I thought you were at Prague Day '97. You became the treasurer for '98.
yeah, that's what I was getting into. I was at 97, and you know, he said, you know, I would commit to having 98 if I could raise $6K. So I managed to raise $6K over a couple months, and he committed to doing Prague Day '98. And he goes, you know what? You have all these contacts with bands that you were asking for signed CDs that, you know, maybe you could contact them about playing. And I became like the booking manager, and he goes, wow, you know, you might as well just keep all the money up there and be the treasurer. So, you know, I was the booking manager and treasurer for Prague Day '98 and got a pretty good lineup together. You know, Flower Kings, Pear Lynn, people, you know, and it was a good lineup for Prague Day. And I said, you know what, Peter, let's start thinking ahead to ’99. I think one of the issues with Prague Day is it's low attendance because it's in, you know, rural North Carolina. And so we found a venue up in the Northeast where there was, you know, huge amounts of prog fans between Boston and DC, all within about a 5-hour drive. You know, you double or triple or quadruple attendance. And he said, yeah, go for it. And I knew Chad. I had traded some CDs with him back then, and the Allentown, PA address stuck in my head, and I hit him up, and he started looking around for possible venues. And after a while, Peter goes, you know what, Rob, I think I want to keep Prague Day where it is. So I said, you know, we've done all this legwork up in PA. We've even contacted some bands already. Would you mind if I started my own thing? And he said, you know, with Chad. And he says, yeah, go for it. You have my blessing. And thus a new Prague Fest in the Northeast was born. And Chad and I thought of, you know, Bethlehem as a nice central location, avoiding the big city issue, but having
it already had the music culture of a music fest, which has been going on, I think, maybe 25 years at least now, where they basically shut down the city for about a month, about a week, and have literally hundreds of bands. So they had used an outdoor band shell at Moravian College, and that's what we first looked into. And then when Peter gave us the blessing to do our own thing, we said, let's scrap this outdoor thing. There's too many extra expenses. There's weather, there's porta potties, there's fencing, there's security. So we threw that out the window and made contact with the guy who ran Foy Hall. And we cleverly talked him into letting us use the hall.
Yeah, we would say it was like a rock classical hybrid. He was kind of fussy. He didn't want a rock concert in the hall.
Very much so. So that Bethlehem, Lehigh Valley location was really smack dab in the middle of DC and Boston, if you look at the map. And, you know, Philadelphia and New York were hotbeds for progressive rock in the 70s. Annie Haslam can sure tell you that in a little while. So that's where we set up shop. And there was one night that Rob and his then wife and I were sitting around. We were at my house, I believe, and we were tossing around names. And we thought about the Bethlehem Art Rock Festival, and she said, really? You want to call it Barf Fest? We said, no, I guess that's not a good idea. So so I suggested Northeast Art Rock Festival, and we all said, sounds good.
Yeah, we wanted to avoid the Prague word. We didn't want to be typecast. You know, we wanted to have some edgier things, some fusion, and expand the tent beyond, you know.
Yeah,
we wanted a good idea.
Umbrella without the stigma of the word Prague.
You guys always cast a wider net than just prog rock.
And that was definitely a big part of its success in the sellout.
Always intentional.
I think it was great in it too, because a lot of
right at the start.
A lot of people would come just, you know, expecting to see, you know, someone from one of the big 5 bands, and of course that was great. But along the way, I think they got exposed to a lot of music that they probably never would have known about otherwise.
Thinking about Door, Gosta Berling's Saga, you know, Pream, even at that pre-show that we had.
True.
You know, Spaced Out. We had a lot of bands that didn't really fit the quote-unquote prog mold. You know, I like to think of the NEARFest lineup always as a smorgasbord, and you come and you try everything, and you might not like every flavor that's there. Some people like more garlic than others, you know. What we never wanted to do was have, you know, a festival just of one style. You know, beef is great, but I don't want it for 3 days in various forms.
How about vanilla ice cream?
Vanilla ice cream is my favorite analogy. You know, I love a good vanilla ice cream, you know, but not 3 days of it. And,
Right, exactly.
you know, not everybody might not like every flavor, but you know what? Your buddy who you only see online loves Magma and Thinking Plague. You might not, but you know, you might be more into Palace and Glass Hammer, but you both end up at the same event having a good time. You might stay for different bands or stay for more of different bands, but it really brought the community, the online community, which, you know, especially in the early part of 2000s was very centered on your site, Progressive Ears. We brought wider amounts of progressive rock, interesting rock music, fusion, whatever, fans together, and it became a family reunion.
Yeah, you know what, and that's an important point you bring up, Rob. We embraced the boom of the internet from the beginning. I mean, even from '99, we had a web presence, we had a URL, you know, our domain name of our own, and we took it seriously. You know, we were out to, our mantra was from day one to day whatever, you know, 14 years later, was to bring the people that love this music together with the bands that play this music that may not meet otherwise. And, you know, regardless of the genre, like we just talked about with the umbrella, that's what we wanted to do. And I think I think based on the comments that we continue to see, even on Progressive Ears and otherwise, I think we succeeded.
I think you guys did too. And, you know, I think the fact that it touched so many people's lives and opened up their eyes is one of the reasons we're talking about it now, almost 10 years later.
There are people that exist now because their parents met at NEARFest and would never have otherwise met, you know? So it's awesome.
It is.
Yeah. You know what, I was thinking about that the other day. The drummer for Enchant ended up marrying the girl in the ticket booth at in Trenton, and now they're married. They live in California and they have a family.
Yeah, and it was wild and it was crazy how that happened, because I went down to Trenton like the week after the fest to pick up the boxes of t-shirts and programs that didn't sell. And, you know, Rebecca, who's the ticket lady, had, you know, was letting me into the room to get them. She goes, you know, Rob, I saw the most beautiful man I ever saw in my life. And he had one of those lanyards on. So I think he was in one of the bands. Can we look at one of the programs and I could like just see who he is out of curiosity? So we page through, we get to the Enchant page. She points at Sean Flanagan, the drummer. She's like, him, that guy. Well, lo and behold, like 3 days later, I get this email from Sean Flanagan. He's like, well, you know, Rob, I know we have it down to Chad because he was the Enchant fan and he brought us there. But I figured you might know. I saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. And I think she worked at the venue. I think she worked in the ticket booth. I didn't get her name, but I saw her a few times. I'm like, wow. So I gave them each other their email addresses and bam, you know, there it was.
They were enchanted.
They have
Wow.
kids that, you know, owe their existence to their parents crossing paths at NEARFest, you know.
Yeah, awesome. That's one of my favorite stories from all the years.
That is awesome. Yeah. And remind us, who was on the bill the first year?
Oh boy! So we had Alaska. They were the first
Oh
band, and they kicked the thing off with Tarkus, which was amazing. We had
Hoedown.
What's that?
It was Hoedown.
Was it Hoedown?
Yes, they did an abridged version.
Oh, that's right.
Tarkus later, but the first notes ever at NEARFest were the cover of ELP's Hoedown.
That's right. Yeah. So we had Alaska. We had Ice Age. We had Crucible. We had Magma. I'm sorry, Mastermind. Wrong MA. IQ. Spock's Beard. The illustrious and infamous Solaris.
Yeah.
Scott McGill's Ham Farm. And the very infamous Sunday morning slot that kicked off the Prague Church, if you want to call it that, was Nathan Mall filling in for the then defunct Phineas Gage.
Okay.
And Guy LeBlanc made his mark, and you know what was odd is like a little more than a year later, you know, Camel's looking for a keyboard player, and they get hold. It's like, you know what? Give this guy Guy LeBlanc and Nathan Mall a look, and they're like, yeah, okay. So they did. And lo and behold, 2 months later, I get this email from Guy saying, you know, I'm in Camel now.
Awesome.
So,
I remember that. And may he rest in peace.
Yep. Wonderful guy.
He was. Now, was that first one in Bethlehem, or did you move to Bethlehem?
In Bethlehem, but I was at Moravian College, south across Lehigh River from Lehigh.
Okay.
It was probably
it was a 428 seat
3-minute drive and a 10-minute walk.
Okay.
So 428 seat theater.
The next year
And
you made.
what we found is that, you know, we just were selling tickets over RMP and rec.music.progressive, which was, you know, tapering off at that point, you know, as Usenet was dying in the late 90s and progressive years, and a few other Yahoo mailing groups like Prog and Other, if I remember.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, we ended up selling out, and then I'm starting to collect names on a wait list. And it was like 200 to 300 people long. And I get to Chad and I'm like, we need a bigger hall. So we touched base with Lehigh, and
from day one, they wanted to have us. It was great.
They were so eager and so willing, and thought our premise was an awesome idea. And yeah.
Okay. So the next year it moved over to Zollner at Lehigh, right?
And it was in Zollner for 2000 and 2001. In 2000, it took about 7 weeks to sell out, just with people calling the box office back in those days. And Chad at NEARFest 2000 goes, you know what? If we sell out in less than, 2 weeks?
Well, that was for 2001.
Huh?
Yep, right. Yep, guys.
Chad said, if we sell out in less than 2 weeks for 2001, I'll show up at the festival next year wearing a dress. Well,
I said I would wear one at some point, and I did.
Yep. And we sold out in 2 hours.
Awesome.
So, and I think people remembered, you know, we posted online that NEARFest was sold out in 2 hours, and people were like, Chad, dress.
Yeah, she was still my girlfriend at the time. My now wife Cheryl was at a flea market, and she found this dark blue sort of flowered sundress thing that I kind of hiked up underneath the sweatshirt and walked out and pulled the sweatshirt off, and the thing fell down, and there I am in all my glory with my bare legs and my sundress, and I owned up to it.
You made good.
Smashing.
But now, that night,
the best part about the story, the best part about it is we came off from our intro from the beginning of at the beginning of 2001, and I go out into the lobby at Zellner Baker Hall. And I walk out there, and I hear this English accent from behind me say, "Nice dress." I turn around, it's Roger Dean. That's how I met him.
Oh, that's awesome. And he did your logo that year, right? So that was the first year that he did the Dragonfly.
We have a great story about that. The first logo he did for NEARFest 2001 was a scarab thing, and I got a fax at my office, you know, and I faxed it to Chad, and Chad's like, I don't know about this. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I don't know about this. So Roger Dean, I think he called you, and he says, so Chad, what do you think? And you go, and Roger just goes, you think it sucks, doesn't it? And it's like, how do you tell Roger Dean that his first idea sucks?
So it looks like a Journey album, Roger, come on.
And well, he goes, up on a yes box set or something like 2 years later.
Yeah.
So he used it for Yes.
Yeah, but he was like, you could tell me it sucks. He goes, not everything I do is great. You just don't see the ones that suck.
Yeah, and I think maybe in that phone call I brought up like, hey, well, how about something like a dragonfly kind of thing or whatever? And sure enough, he sends us sort of like this hybrid mechanical dragonfly, and it was great. It was perfect.
Yep.
Yep, I remember that. That was the first year I went. And
I remember at NEARFest 2001 in the morning before the festivities started on Saturday, I saw Roger in the lobby. And he's like, Roger, you want to catch some breakfast? And he goes, yeah, sure. So we went across to that Perkins. And, you know, I forget what it was. I had some eggs. He had something else. But the bill comes, and it's like $14. And I reach into my pocket to get it. And he goes, no, Rob, I got this. And I'm like, Roger, you're our guest. I got to pay for breakfast. He goes, no, I just sold the original painting of Tales from Topographic Oceans for £250,000. I think I can handle $14.
That's amazing. I wonder who bought that.
It's amazing what a couple flying fish will do for you.
I'll tell you what. Alrighty. Well, I got a couple more questions. Again, we are going to bring in our special guests here in about 15 minutes, maybe less, one by one, about 5-minute intervals. So stick around. We've got lots of surprises in store. Further, I kind of mentioned in advance who they are, but I didn't mention it on the show. So if you have been just watching tonight, you're going to be surprised. Alrighty, let's see what else I got here before we dig any further. Okay, so obviously Prague Day, it was kind of your initial inspiration for NEARFest. Were there any other fests, or was that the only one back then?
Oh, absolutely. The Prague Fest in California was a lot of inspiration from that, from what Greg and his partners pulled off back in 93, 94. They had some phenomenal lineups. Even the Praguescape lineup of 96 down in Baltimore with Chris Lampka from Of Sound Mind. That was a great show. I remember going to that with Chris Busby and his brother, and seeing Glass Hammer early on. For some reason doing an Argent cover, which blew me away. Anyway, first time I saw Porcupine Tree, they were more in that Pink Floyd phase at the time. Mm-hmm. But it was a fun show. It was something I'd never been to before. So when it got down to Rob calling me and say, hey, you want to help out with this festival thing? I had an idea, but, we didn't exactly know what we were doing to start, but we figured it out.
Yeah, you sure did. So are there any big fish that got away that you really wanted to get but just never quite nailed down?
Oh,
outside of
who that is.
Eloy's obvious because of what happened in 2012.
Oh, yeah,
we actually tried to
get
him. We actually tried to get Eloy in 2000, and I faxed Frank Borneman, and I got a fax back telling me that they had essentially retired. That obviously didn't end up being true. But then 2012, he had the unfortunate accident and the band couldn't come.
Boy,
but,
we saved that at the last minute, boy. Eddie Jobson and John Wetton bailed our butts out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that was magic.
But as far as big fish,
it was so stressful at that point.
Rob, would you say if there's anybody that got away that we tried for?
Camel got away for a few years, but we finally nabbed them. We asked the Dixie Dregs a few times, but Steve Morse could never get it to work out. Given
That's
that
true.
he joined
Forgot about
Purple. They said, he said Morse was wrote me. He said, yeah, oh man, we'd love to do that, but my commitments with Purple. I'll let be in touch with my manager. We'll see if we could work it out. We tried a couple times, and I think they would have been great.
Great.
Kenso took several years to get just because of the schedules of the guys in the band. The guitar player, as you probably know, is a dentist, and he had to try to figure out how to get away from his patients for.
Well, the main thing was their drummer was the drummer for some Japanese pop queen that is always on tour in the summer, and we just really got lucky that weekend. I remember their manager Tatsuro Ueda, who came to 04, and he grabbed Chad and I kind of in some barren corner or some deserted hallway of Zellner and says, I think we can make Kenso work next year. And we were like, let's do this.
Oh yeah, that was a no-brainer.
Yeah, they're amazing.
No matter how many Motif 7 keyboards they needed.
They needed 14 of them, and we got
I think they needed 6, and then in the last week they needed 1 more.
What are some of the more outlandish equipment needs that you've had over the years?
Engelgard. Anna Holmgren wrote me. Matthias Olsen wrote me and agreed to, have Engelgard reunite at NEARFest 03. This was in the fall of 02. And a few months later, Anna Holmgren writes me. She goes, Rob, we need 3 Mellotrons in perfect working order for NEARFest 2003.
Does such a thing exist?
Hold on. I hope it's no problem, period. So we're like, what do we do? I go to Chad, like, turns out I did some research and there was a Mellotronist Yahoo group. And I posted this request and this guy, Frank Stickle, answers. He goes, I have two. One's in perfect working order. I can get the second one in perfect working order if you can fork out about $1,000. He goes, I'd have to buy a third, but I have a lead. I'm like, okay. He goes, I can get it for $100. So I'm like, okay, fine. Here's $100. He goes and buys this Mellotron from some old lady that had it down her basement for 25 years. And he told me he spent the better part of an afternoon vacuuming out mouse turds in a mouse nest from the back of the thing. Yeah. And that ended up getting refurbished, and that was the third Mellotron.
And we used Frank Stickle from then on. He was our Mellotron wrangler from the rest of our time.
He was great.
Great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, you know, the after hours parties became pretty legendary. And I was wondering if, what are a few great moments that pop into your head? Or
Got to tell them about the fish story at the table.
Oh, well, I'll start with one of my favorites. Actually, there are two really good ones that I remember earlier on. Mike Could, I believe Mike Could played, didn't they?
One year, yeah.
Yep, and the other one wasn't acoustic, but it was John Galgano and his wife, and she did her solo set, and she's got a phenomenal voice. I'm blanking on her name at the moment.
Laura Mead.
Laura Mead, thank you. And that went over really well. That was just really a really nice set for people to come from the loud concert in the concert hall and sit and just chill and listen to her amazing voice.
One thing that stuck with me the second year, you know, Gianni Leone of Il Balletto di Bronzo is kind of a weird and flamboyant kind of fellow. But I remember he went to a grocery store and he bought like $100 worth of wine and baguettes and cheese, and he just plops it down on the table in front of us. You know, we were just bullshitting in the hotel ballroom, and he went and bought all this food and wine, and that was kind of awesome.
Yeah, we had early on, we had a guy local to me in southeastern Pennsylvania named Chris Arders, and he would come with an acoustic guitar and lead sing-alongs, whatever. And the highlight of his after-party soiree was his acoustic version of Stairway to Gilligan's Island. So somehow he took the Gilligan's Island theme and put Stairway to Heaven to it, and it was absolutely hysterical. He stopped coming maybe, I don't know, mid to late 2000s for whatever reason, but he was a good guy. But what Rob was alluding to, when Fish played in 2008, Fish, you may not know this, but he likes to drink. And he was pretty lit that night, and he was sitting at one of the big round tables in the ballroom, and he probably had 15 people around him, and they got into a very political discussion about the United States, and he started to get hot, and all of a sudden he slams the table with both hands. You know how big the guy is, and the whole room, no matter what they were doing, just stopped and looked, and it got really, really quiet and really, really uncomfortable, and then it chilled out and everything was fine. And probably about half an hour later, our friend Buster Harvey said, yeah, he was out in the lobby, and I guided him into the elevator, pressed up and said good night and closed the door and just sent him off to bed. So the Fish was a little
he had trouble finding his room. You know, those hallways, the rooms all kind of
they all look the same. Yeah, Fish was on fire that night.
Well, that's why.
But and coming off of a phenomenal performance, which he released as a DVD, and it's really top notch. It's a really good.
He told me later he was riding up in the elevator, and he, you know, it was like what 3:30 in the morning at that point. He said he heard in his head, "Derek, dear, time to go to bed." He heard his mother's voice in his head. It's like.
Well, my favorite thing about Fish that year was when they first rolled in, they got a ride from some fan. It was him and his manager. And they get out of the car in Bethlehem in the summer. You know, it's like a 90-degree day, whatever. And he had tied one on the night before. wasn't feeling great. And we told him about the coffee room downstairs that Greg Jones is running. So they go down, they get coffee, they're starting to feel better. And I don't know, maybe an hour or two later, he's sitting out on the loading dock and he's by himself. And he's 6'6", 6'7", whatever he is. And he's sitting on a chair, but like his knees are higher than his hips because he's just bigger than the rest of us. And so there's this giant guy sitting there with his cup of coffee and not looking real happy. But I walk over to him and I say, Fish. And I'd met him earlier, so he knew who I was. I said, Fish, I have a surprise for you. And he slowly looks up and he goes, what? And I said, I've been in close contact with Mark Wilkinson, and I have a slideshow together, and I have Mark Wilkinson art for every one of your songs tonight in your set. And he just looks up at me with this little smile and goes, fucking brilliant. And that was it.
Awesome. Okay. So I had a few people send in some NEARFest memories. I don't really have time to read them all tonight, but I thought I would read one that I particularly got a kick out of. This is from Kavis Tarabi.
Oh,
what group, yeah. What group did he play with? I'm trying to remember
Guapo.
now. Yeah. That's right. I'm sorry.
Guapo 06.
That's right. He
After a long night.
He said, I love my lone.
The night before.
Yep.
Yeah, he said, I love my lone experience of NEARFest. It was here I first met my friend for life, Steve Feigenbaum, the wonderful Paul Sears, who is one of my favorite drummers, and Dave Kerman, who I would go on to play with in Bob Drake's band. I'll never forget drinking into the small hours with Gary Green, who, after being extremely complimentary about Gapo's set, said, I guess you must be familiar with the concept of a day job. And then he says, but the memory I know will always stay with them is the stress of our torturous journey from Philadelphia in 2 cabs throughout the night to get to Bethlehem in time to pretty much grab several cups of coffee and do a brief sound check, change into our stage clothes, perform, having been up half the night unsuccessfully trying to fix Zombie's van, who we were touring with, after a show. I don't remember what time you got the call or when the decision to take the cabs was made, but I'm sorry for the stress these 4 sketchy British dropouts caused you.
Yeah, I got the call at 2:30 in the morning of, Rob, we're stuck down in Philly. What do we do? You know, we have a broken down van. And I'm like, call cabs, we'll pay. Right. So I remember settling up with them for the cabs. It was like a couple hundred, you know, for cab fare to get them up. You know, by the time they got to Bethlehem, it was like 8:30 in the morning and they were going on first. So it's like, guys, your sound check is 9 o'clock. Go down to the coffee room and have Greg Jones hook you up with some espresso and let's hit it. No sleep, also, no shower, no nothing.
If I remember correctly, that night before in Philadelphia, they played to like 7 or 8 people.
Yeah,
and then walked into the back bar hall and saw these seats and were like, wow. And then they did their sound check and they came out to a full house. And I honestly, Morganville had a similar experience in 2008.
Yeah, they were like, oh yeah, 11 in the morning, who's going to be there?
Oh man, that was some of the best ones. I called it the wake up bomb.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, boom, just explosion of sound. I remember Kenji Hockey was like that.
Yeah, we built some excitement, so people were in their seats that very first morning.
And then another one in Trenton, Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum.
Oh, yeah.
Followed by Glass Hammer. We did the hell, then the heaven, back to back.
The hell and heaven set, exactly.
Very intentional.
Yeah, that I think that inspired a Vanilla Fest of its own later. But that's
let's just not. Yeah, because I remember.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we don't know. I don't know what you. There. But anyway, I remember Stephen Ellis. I think he was Captain Neo or whatever. And he actually, like you said, you know, Rob, I kind of like Myriador. Actually, I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to call you Captain RIO, and you know. That upset him. So
wear it like a badge of honor. Who was the gentleman that was always kind of like doing this in the front row, like he was having a religious experience?
That could have been
Anthony Ferraro during UK.
Okay. Yeah. It's like,
Oh, you're picking on Anthony before I am. Wow.
no, I was quite inspired. I thought, wow, you know, I wish I was that close to feeling that way. You know, I'm loving this, but you know.
I mean, we had a lot of people that would come up to us after the show was over. I remember, I think it was actually Chris Arders who was like crying, I can't believe I saw Bonko. You know, it was awesome. You know,
Oh, yeah.
people
Moments.
pulling that.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, why don't we start bringing in our guests? Chad, who have we got first?
I believe we have one of the most amazing voices in all of rock music, Miss Annie Haslam.
Excellent. Well, here is Annie, and thank you so much for being part of things tonight.
There she is.
Hello, Annie.
Hey,
Good evening.
can you hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me call? It looks like she's crashed.
The connection might be not as good in the art studio. I'm not
I
sure.
don't know what else to do here. What do I click? You have to tell me what to do. I've never done this, so. It says your internet. Click if you want to switch to a different phone or speaker. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you,
Can hear
yes.
you. We can
Can
hear
you
you
not hear
call.
me? No, I can't hear you very well.
Okay.
Getting better.
Yeah, that looks better. Can you hear us better?
I can hear you about the same. I'm deaf in one ear anyway.
All righty. Well, hopefully
I'm deaf
we'll-
in one ear anyway, so I'm like, you know, half the woman I should be, really. But I can you hear me all right?
It's a little intermittent, but I think it'll get better as the night goes.
Oh, just froze.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's your connection in the studio?
Are you talking to me? I don't know what I can't tell what's going on here. Is that you, Rob?
Yes, indeed, Annie. I'm here.
Which is Rob? Rob,
I'm floating in outer space.
I thought you were. What are you on?
I'm on prog rock. I don't need any other drugs.
Not anything else. Woo.
When I'm a university professor, and this is how I gave all my lectures from March to May, was floating in outer space.
Hey, isn't there there's a comet coming, isn't there, in the next couple of days?
Well, in the morning sky, if you get up at 4 in the morning with some binoculars. Yeah. I'm trying to encourage Chad to get out there with the birds and take some snaps of comet.
Well, you told me a day late. I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday to drive to Rhode Island. I could have seen everything.
Yeah.
Oh.
But it's going to be in the evening sky at the end of the month.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
Yeah.
And is it as big as Halley's Comet?
It actually, Halley's Comet last appearance was very disappointing because it was on the far side of the sun. This will actually be better. But anyway, we're here to talk about music.
Yeah. NEARFest
Yeah,
memories.
that's true.
It was a life's dream for me to see Renaissance in NEARFest 2012. And I remember Annie dedicated Carpet of the Sun to me and Chad as it was the occasion of the final NEARFest. That was a moment I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget.
Yeah, that was an amazing moment. Just you and Michael Dunford, as you call him, Mickey. That was incredible.
That was a fantastic set. Beautiful.
It's the only time I've ever seen Renaissance.
How many years did you do it in total? NEARFest?
From 99 to 2012 with a skipped year in 2011.
The
Right.
13 shows.
Wow.
for a bunch of rank
And
amateurs.
were they all at the Zoner Center?
No,
All but three.
Where were they?
We had one in Moravian across the river, also in Bethlehem, and then two in Trenton, New Jersey, 2002, 2003.
Right.
And I believe you joined us with your arch shortly after we went back to Bethlehem.
I did. I'd never met him before. I knew his work, of course. That was great. I really enjoyed.
Oh yeah, I remember.
We got the band back together then, had we?
I remember, Annie, you asked me, Rob, who is the beautiful white-haired man in the denim jacket in my room?
I did not.
Oh yeah, you did. Oh yeah. And you, I said, that's Roger Dean.
I did.
So Eddie, how are you spending your days lately during this unusual time?
Oh God.
She's minding her geese.
Yeah, I've got my geese. I've got my geese, 7 of them now. And can you hear the frogs?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm right by a pond, so there's lots of frogs out there. But yeah, we were about to go to Brazil on the 15th of March, and we've got a rehearsal scheduled for the 12th and the 13th, the 13th being the Friday the 13th. And up until that point, for like 2 or 3 weeks, I was getting this a terrible gut feeling that it was not going. The virus was going to get worse, and we couldn't end up in Brazil and not get back, or anywhere really, because it was just like it was just crazy. So we did one rehearsal reluctantly. And we talked about the situation, and the guys in the band said, look, we'll do whatever you want to do. If you want to go to Brazil, we're going to go. We're set for it. The promoter got all the tickets and sold the tickets, for the shows. I was concerned if I backed out, I would get sued because I signed a contract. And anyway, I had kind of a sleepless night, and we did another rehearsal, and I said, I'll make the decision, make it together the next morning. And so we couldn't play an instrument, decided that would be it. We were getting things on the phones constantly, really messages saying Argentina's just closed its border. And Chile and Colombia and with my boyfriend David 2 days before everybody else to do some fantastic TV and radio. O Globo is the biggest thing in Brazil for TV and radio, and they'd got that for us to do it live. Me and Mark, who's now the guitarist who actually lives in Brazil. So we were going 2 days earlier on the Sunday on the 15th, and the guys were following on the 17th. But on the Friday the 13th, we get there, and I called up the agent, and he said, before you say anything, Annie, he said, the promoter called and he's rescheduling the shows. Can you do August? And we all went, really? August? That's a bit close, Anyway, we could do it, so we said yes. But that's not happening now either, because they're having such a terrible time there. But if we'd gone, we would have ended up in quarantine. I do have friends out there, and we probably would have been taken care of, but we'd probably still be out there.
Wow.
So that was pretty scary, and it took me a while to get over the disappointments, because this year I was kind of winding my career down, and because I can't go on forever, as much as my voice is strong, everything is my responsibility. So I thought, well, this year, will be the last year. But then we had to cancel Night of the Prog. We were headlining the first opening night, in Lorelei, Germany.
Great festival.
We lost that. Sorry?
That's a great festival. I went.
I know, yeah. But it's been rescheduled to next year. But the thing is, I wanted to have probably ended it this year, and so because I'm tired, it's a lot of work, as you know. So we lost that, and I was going to Portugal with Patrick Moraz, just the two of us. We're doing a show together. We lost that.
Cool.
We lost Brazil, and it was just like, oh dear, you know what? I think that first of all, when it first happened, it was like so. I kept waking up thinking it was a dream, you know, a bad dream, a bad movie or something. But the interesting thing is that I've been wearing a mask for about 12 years now, not the same one, and not all the time. But I've worn a mask because I found that, you know, I was becoming susceptible to picking things up at shows. You know, going to a supermarket before, you know, week before I do rehearsals or a tour or anything. And I thought, I've got to be careful. So I started wearing a mask about a month before I record, before I do any shows. And I used to get all these weird looks, you know, what's wrong with you? You know, because you get a weird look now if you're not wearing them. So yeah. But the thing that I don't quite understand is, I mean, I'm still in lockdown in a way, because I'm kind of, you know, because of my age and my immune system, because of my breast cancer and things like that. But I don't understand, if you're going shopping and you wear a mask, which you should, right? First of all, you've got to put it over your nose, because a lot of people don't do that. They keep it down here.
It does no good around your neck.
No. And so anyway, we wear gloves. My boyfriend and I wear gloves, because if you don't wear gloves, you're picking up all you're opening doors, and they clean the door handles, but they don't clean the properly on the other side. So you're picking all this stuff up. I don't see the point of not wearing gloves. I don't get it. So we're wearing gloves all the time wherever we go. And we're washing them. You can put them in the washing machine. Those plastic gloves.
Well, we want you to stay safe, Annie, because you are a treasure. You are the first lady of progressive rock.
Would agree.
Indeed, indeed.
Now, what I would like to real quick ask Annie, what do you remember of the 2012 performance of Renaissance at NEARFest? What are your memories on stage?
Oh, well, it was wonderful, because there were a lot of people there that, you know, John Wetton was there, wasn't he? Well, who was John working with that night?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who was he playing with?
He was with UK that night.
Oh, it was UK. Night. Okay. So it was great to see John. And of course, Roger Dean was there. And it was a great bill. I thought, especially even when I went before and I was just showing my art, that the building fit, the everything was so classy. The building, the lighting, the filming, the photography that was done, and everything was so classy. And I'm a bit of a snob. Sorry?
Chad and I did not rest unless we were the best in the world at what we did.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was so obvious, the work that had gone into it and the love that had gone into it. You know what I mean? It was just so special.
I think you really pointed out the love. You know, Chad and I ran this as a not-for-profit festival from day one. You know, the artists were so surprised. What do you mean you're not taking a 20% cut of our merchandising? No, we want you to have it, you know?
No, it was never about us, ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. And I just remember that was, I've never been to anything like that, really, that's been like really, really classy and really well done. And just, there was no hassles at all. There was no problems. There was nothing to complain about. Nothing, not that any of our band would anyway, because
you never had to beg for your fee. We had it right there.
Well, you had it right there in your briefcase.
In the infamous briefcase. Yep. Because I remember John Wetton, you know, I had a few things for him to sign, and I opened the briefcase. He goes, "Wait a minute, it's a bunch of fucking money. I've never seen that in real life. I just thought it was something in the movies."
Oh God. Yeah,
I
it was
remember-
fabulous. Yeah, I remember the show. I remember, you know, I was amazed that they could put that painting of mine behind us, you know, so
we
big and
surprised
everything.
you with that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, that you know, that was kind of gave me the idea that I wanted to do that again, which we did a couple of years ago. But and then the coffee.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
unbelievable.
We got the
That
idea
was,
when we had Tony Levin play, and we knew he was a fan of espresso.
Yep.
I forget who was the first to make contact with Greg.
You know what?
I don't remember how that happened.
I'm not sure either. I will have to ask Greg. I was in contact with him the other day because I was talking to Annie. We were doing a dry run for Zoom the other day, and she said, "What was the name of that Ethiopian coffee that he had?" I said, "Let me reach out." So I reached out to Greg, and he sent me the name. I gave that to Annie. I hope you're tracking that down. But I will reach out to him and find out what the initial contact was. I don't remember, but I do remember that we specifically had him come in and set up shop for espresso for Tony Levin, and Tony was floored.
that was fabulous. That was a nice touch. But yeah, and they're great bands, you know, really, really unusual combination of bands, and you did a great job.
I remember Keith Emerson asking, I heard about this coffee room. Where's the coffee? When we had him in 2006.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Well, I'd drink a cup and you'd say, oh, that's my favorite. Then you drink another one and say, God, no, that's better. And oh God, that's even better. I mean, it's amazing all this shit that we drink that they call coffee. You know.
True.
I remember I went over my mom's house recently, and she goes, "I got you the good coffee." I'm like, "Oh yeah." She goes, "I got Folgers this time." I'm like, "Ah."
Folgers in your cup.
Oh,
Well, I'll share with everybody that my son Andrew arranged for Annie Haslam to call me on my birthday a few weeks ago and call me and wish me happy birthday. I was just gobsmacked. That was hilarious. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. I like surprising people like that. Yeah. But I wrote back to him and said, well, what's the number? And the thing is, then I forgot to look again, because I don't check constantly my Facebook thing, you know, because I don't do the friends thing, because
right.
I can't deal with it. I can't deal with it, you know? But and then I remember the next day, and I saw he'd left a number, so that's when I called next day. So it was a belated birthday.
Yeah, hey, it was awesome. It was awesome.
You didn't get the bill yet, did you?
Oh, he's gonna get it, and he'll have to pay. He's now a gourmet cook, so he'll have to send you a cheesecake as fee if you like cheesecake.
Wow.
excellent.
It's a gourmet.
All right. Well, Annie, please stick around. We're going to have a few more guests come in that may look familiar. Who's next, Chad?
I believe if I'm not looking at the text I sent you, but I believe Larry Fast is up next. Is that right?
Okay. Well, he's in the waiting room.
Annie knows Larry.
I know Larry for many years. 1988, I think. Oh no, before then, the 70s. Yeah, he turned up at Delaney Studios.
Hi, Larry.
There he is.
Hi, Larry.
Good evening, Larry.
I'm here.
1988.
Good to see you.
Now we're early.
Hi, Larry.
Annie Haslam's on with us, Larry.
I can see. No, Annie, it goes back to Sire. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Larry.
That sounded like a new Synergy composition.
Hey, didn't you come to the Delaney Studios?
No, you've mentioned that a few times, but it was Sire in New York
Oh, okay.
through Seymour Stein.
Right.
Well, Larry, thanks a million for being our guest tonight and
No, thanks for inviting me.
telling some memories over the years. What have you been up to lately?
Well, a lot of different things, because you know there's a lot that I do in different fields. So one of the things that's been going on goes back to the Straub's 50th anniversary show a year ago, a little over a year ago. And I've got the recordings here. There's going to be some kind of album release, DVD release. It's all a little bit up in the air on the business side. That's not really, I'm not part of that part of it. But I've got 9 hours of the multiple sets that were done for that. It was practically a mini NEARFest, except it was all Straubs. And so this lockdown, it's here in my studio in my house. In fact, the other side of the room that I'm in right now, and picking through these 64 track recordings and figuring out what's on there, sorting out the orchestra, the UN choir, all the different iterations of the Straubs with former members who came back. We had 4 different keyboardists at different times for it. So there's a lot on that. So that's my sort of go-to hobby part of things. I mean, I'm taking it very seriously, but that's
what we did with NEARFest. It was a hobby, but man, we took it seriously. We were were amateurs but pros.
That might have been why I felt such an affinity for you guys.
Professional amateurs.
Yeah, taking it very seriously though.
Well, Larry was part of the very first one. He gave the Prog 101 lecture at the very first NEARFest.
Yeah, that was killing time during your set changeovers. And I don't remember how that came about. Do you have?
We asked you, and you said, "Yeah, I could."
Yeah,
you weren't that far away. You were like,
no, I mean,
hour,
I remember.
right?
Yeah, I remember driving in. Phyllis and I, my wife, drove from northern New Jersey, where I'm based, and I knew the Lehigh Valley because I had gone to college in the Lehigh Valley. I was in Easton. So
were you at Lafayette?
I was at Lafayette. And
wow.
In fact, while I was there, that's kind of where I got started in all of this. I mean, I knew I wanted to be in the music business from the time I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. But when I was at college, I was already doing electronic music. I was already building synthesizers. I'd been doing that actually through high school as an electronic hobbyist. And now in college, I was rounding it out with computer science and some electrical engineering studies. But I figured the business was something I wanted to break into. And what was the best vehicle was college radio. Because once you were there, then you had a direct line into the record companies. So I had a very good friend, Frank Urbaniak. We were both students at Lafayette. Frank is now the drummer and the lyricist with Fractal Mirror, if any of you are following the prog communities on that. If you haven't checked that out, check out their albums. Really good. And I mastered them for them. So, and Brett Kull is also, he's producing them. So this is all kind of in-house. Anyway, Frank and I, though, were at college. We were in the same fraternity, which was not an Animal House kind of thing. It was sort of a prog house, if anything. And we used the radio connections to call the record companies. So when bands like Yes, who were barely known, and they had a new album coming out, they were about to break through around the time of the Yes album and then Fragile. And it was very easy to call up Atlantic and say, we're on a radio station, we'd like to interview. And we did that. And we discovered Genesis very early on, just around the time, just before, well, we knew of them, but when Nursery Crime was coming out, we pulled kind of the same thing. So we got to make the connections, but it was more than that. For me, it was getting to know the business. How did publishing work? How did the promoters work? What's the economics of all of this? Because I knew the artistic side. That was easy. It was, how do you break into the business when you're 19 years old and you want to do it, but you don't know how to do it. So I kind of went to college nominally to go to law school, getting a degree in history and studying architecture as well, but always going, I really want to be a record producer. I want to be a composer. I want to be doing that stuff. And I was able to craft my own way through that.
Well, I'll tell you, Larry, we were very honored to have you at the very first one.
I think, does Larry hold a record for most appearances at NEARFest? Or did
he may? But
you guys had told me that at one time.
Yeah.
Well, what I was always flattered by is, Larry was at the first one, and then year after year, I would get an email about a month or two out from Larry saying, "Hey, do you mind if Phyllis and I come out. We're just like, absolutely, you're our guest anytime you want to come. And you show up, hang out backstage, and just, you know, enjoyed it. And just the fact that you wanted to come every year was very touching to us. And it really came to a head when we talked you into performing again.
Later in 2008.
Right.
Yep.
So when's that 5-1 coming out, by the way? Still waiting on that.
You know, the Strub stuff is the same setup, and I keep revising that. It has more at this point to do with figuring out what the best distribution mode is, and the whole record industry is so up in the air right now.
Yeah.
But, if it comes down to it, if it's like another 18 months or something, I think I'm just going to end up putting them out as like a boutique, you know, direct to consumer.
Oh, I think you could have a cottage industry.
Yeah, I think so too.
Make some bucks there. Yeah.
There is, and there's more of the 5.1 HD audio coming on for streaming now. There's some services that are starting to make that a reality. So I want to see how that.
Yeah, Robert Rich has gotten involved in that. He was one of our solo performers.
Right.
I think NEARFest 07. I think we had Robert.
I think that's right. And then we had Steve Roach as well, who put a live album out.
Yep, some electronic music artists. So.
Yep.
Alrighty, well, what do you say we bring in our next guest? Let's see, it looks like it's Derek Moore of Nectar. So why don't we go ahead and get Derek in here? And
oh, it's like a NEARFest reunion.
I know it is. It's like we got planes on the runway waiting to take off. And so here's the next.
And so far, it's a Sire Passport reunion as well. We were all
record was it
Look at
Annie in Wonderland on
Look at him with his microphone. What a show off.
Good evening. It's connecting now.
Not yet. There it is.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Hi, Mo.
Good evening.
How you doing?
Hey, Mo.
Good to see you.
You can poke your head in on.
Hey, Annie, how you doing?
Oh, good, thanks.
Hi, Phyllis.
Hey,
Phyllis.
how you doing? Good to see everybody.
Hey, Mo.
I'm hunkered down in North Carolina. Hold on, let me turn this off. I've been watching the broadcast on my other computer. Hold on.
Okay, thanks.
Better shut it off.
Hey, love your Yankees shirt, Mo. I hope.
Yeah, shit, yeah.
Absolutely.
Big
Thank you a
Yankee.
million for dropping by tonight.
Oh, it's fun, especially with all you guys, you know.
Yeah, Mo. I remember Mo would come out to NEARFest, just drop by after the big reunion in 02. Though I have to say, one of the crazy things from Nektar's appearance at NEARFest is Roy takes me aside and he goes, "Here's our guest list, and it's 85 people long, and it's a sold out." He's like, "I hope you have seats for all our friends." I'm like, "Mo, we don't. The place is sold out." He goes, "Well, what are we gonna do?" I said, "Well, 20 of them can come." So, he was, disappointed, but he has, he's trying to figure out who among the 85 people that he'd promised tickets to would end up coming into the hall. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, it's crazy when you're playing anywhere. I mean, we just did a 31-day tour, and we got people showing up from everywhere. It's just out of the blue. We get calls.
Yeah,
well, can you put us on the guest list?
We had a foot of snow here in Lansing. Otherwise, I would have been there. I was so upset that the weather turned. I couldn't do it.
I'm going to tell you a little secret. My mother takes care of the weather.
Oh.
Whenever I shoot, if I'm shooting a competition, never rains. It's not rained in 20 years. And when we went on tour, we went up, we thought it was a bit dicey because we went all the way up through Canada, over to Detroit.
It was what, February, right?
We saw a flurry of snow the whole time. That was it. It was nice weather.
So Mo, what have you been up to lately?
Well, we're sort of hanging out.
Oh,
We finished our tour March 8th. That was the end of the 31 dates. And then we were supposed to have a month off. And then we were supposed to go back down the East Coast. And then we were going to go over to the West Coast for Sea Prog, and then go down the West Coast and come back on the lower half of the States. And that's where we are right now. You know, we're just in limbo.
How are you spending your days in limbo since then?
We have a house down here in North Carolina that we're eventually going to move to. And we've been spending 5 or 6 weeks here, 5 or 6 weeks in New Jersey. And we've been slowly bringing stuff down and decorating the house and, you know, doing stuff that you do, you know.
Oh.
I built myself a little studio, which is where I am now. And I've been playing music. And the guy, we did a one video that we put out. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was it's all over. We put that out as an individual video, everybody playing where they were, you know.
What song was that?
It's All Over from Recycled.
You know, I hope that that's. I'm waiting for some of our prog artists. I'm friends with Jack Hughes of Wang Chung on Facebook, and they did a remake, a quarantine-themed version of their hit song. So I wish we could have like a prog 25-minute opus on Wear Your Frickin' Mask.
Sanitize your phone.
Yeah, I've got 2 different ones, a black one and a colored one.
There you go. We got to change them out, you know.
Interchange it so they know I change them, you know.
Excellent. Well, Mo, stick around. I'd love to talk about the new album here in a few minutes. We got a couple more planes on the runway that I want to
very
get
strong new Nektar album. Very, very strong.
Awesome.
So
that's
good.
awesome.
Have you all heard it?
I have, yeah. I bought it. It's great.
Glad you like it. We're already writing new music.
That's awesome. Keep
Awesome.
it
All right. Okay. Well, next up, we've got the guy that ran sound every year in audio visual, and also played a few times with Echolyn, Brett Kull, their guitarist. So
Our recording engineer.
that's right. It's gonna look like the Brady Bunch by the time we get all these windows open.
Yeah, really.
I know it.
Yeah,
Hey,
who
Brett.
knew?
Good evening.
Hey, Brett.
Hey guys,
Hey, Brett.
Hey,
Thank you
guy.
for your patience.
How you doing, man?
good man.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
I've had beers in that kitchen.
Yeah, that's right. You have. You guys just. How you guys been doing? Okay.
Cheers,
Thank
brother.
you.
Cheers. Can you grab me one,
Yeah,
please?
I'm
Thank you. Chad, you're down in your basement. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm down in the office.
Nice. So nice to see you, man.
It is great to see you again, Brett. I'm floating here in outer space.
Holy shit, Rob, that looks great.
That's virtual Zoom background, and this is where I taught my 2 months of my intro chemistry classes floating in outer space this way.
What's the orb that you're in front of, the sphere? Is it a planet or what is it?
Earth.
Oh, gotcha.
It's actually a backwards view of the Earth for me, but you could actually make out Norway and stuff like that. So.
Oh, cool. Oh, I see it. Yeah, behind you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool, man.
I hear the aliens have been locking their doors when they pass Earth lately.
Well, yeah, they're like, yeah, there's too much stupidity going on. You know, this is why
keep
this
moving.
is why we shove things up your ass.
We don't want to bother with that anymore. Just keep moving.
I just saw Larry.
That's the alien. That's the alien COVID test.
Larry's face says it all.
Hey, Larry, nice to see you, man.
You too.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I know. Frank just sent me one of the mixes. That's not
Oh, was it one of the ones with for Leo?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sounded great,
nice.
though.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate
Actually,
it.
he sent me one, and I said I liked it, so he sent me another, but I haven't listened to it yet.
Oh, cool, dude. That's great. Yeah. I love those guys. Those are great guys.
So you guys are having an Echolyn album gestating?
Yeah, we've got about 60 minutes worth of new music, and yeah, it's really it's I'm so excited by it. But obviously, this whole zombie apocalypse threw a little monkey wrench into things. So, but yeah, it's great. We've got Jordan Perlson's playing drums. Chris and Ray and I are writing the tunes, and it's just great. It's kind of like a May kind of a thing because Tom's not in it right now. He wanted to take a little bit of a break, which is totally cool. But we still hang out all the time, and it's all good vibes, dude. It's beautiful.
Have you got a possible title of the album yet, or is that still up in the air?
No, not yet. Not yet, but soon. I hope so. Yeah, we have all the songs. I just have to see how they pan out. But yeah, it's really cool. I'm really excited by it a lot.
Well, cool. I hope
it's different, and it's different too, because that's the thing. We always try to like find like a new angle with something. So this one is just, it's like I said, just Chris Ray and I writing, which is kind of like May that way. I don't know if you remember that album, but it's sort of like that kind of a vibe, you know.
We saw it at
NEARFest 2002.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
49 minutes later, people are going, "What the hell was that?"
I think that was your idea, Chad, or I don't know if it was Rob's or what.
It was epic.
I think we talked about it, and you said, "Well, we're thinking about playing." I said, "Do it. Why not?"
Yeah.
Well, I had also heard it. I remember coming to the studio, and you had just gotten done mixing it. And you were so sick of hearing 49 minutes of that music. You walked in the studio. I was there with Ray and Chris, and you put me in the captain's chair, and you walked in. I don't think you even looked at me. You pressed play, and you walked out.
Yeah.
I think we saw you an hour later after the song was over.
Well, I'm sure Larry knows that whole thing. When you get done mixing 50 minutes worth of music, and then you're into mastering that, which I had basically been mastering all day long. I'm like, I need to walk away from this, you know? Yeah.
I know it all too well. And then the other thing was, so when you leave the studio, what do you put on in the car when you're driving home?
More music.
Flip-flop radio.
That's exactly right. You know what? I think I just went outside and walked around in the driveway and just listened to Robins and Cardinals in the air. You know, I couldn't even do it anymore. But, you know, I'll tell you, Chad, it was nice that you came over because, again, I'm sure Larry knows this. There's something really important about having somebody else listen to it, just because it's weird. It like makes you think about the music different when somebody else is listening to it. It gives you a whole new perspective. And
you guys have been nice enough to do that with me for a few albums.
I think for that,
does it help because you're so close to it that you don't get tunnel vision, or you might think this passage is flawed and that's all you hear?
Yeah, well, it's a weird thing because if you sit in a room, say I've been mixing all day on a song, and then somebody else comes into the room and sits and listens to it, immediately I have a completely different perspective. If somebody else is in there, it's a weird thing. Because then I'm aware of their body language and the way that their eyes move, their ears move, their body moves. And, I may have them like Chad. I'll be like, hey, just sit in the control chair and listen to it. And I'll just sit back on the chair, and I'm watching them, and sitting back in another chair gives you a whole different vibe.
I remember sitting there listening to The End is Beautiful when you guys made that album, and turning around and looking at the three of you guys and saying, why are there so many guns on this album?
Oh, with the lyrics,
yeah, especially like Arc of Dead.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a gun on my pillow. That's all Stephen King there. Yeah, it's funny.
Well, excellent, Brett. Stick around. We'd love to talk a little more about the new album. Got one more guest sitting on the runway, Mr. Mike Keneally.
All right.
Hey.
Up the new album.
One Mike. Hey, I love the drawing, Mike.
Yeah.
All right.
Hello.
Hey.
Good to see you all.
In the house.
I think everybody needs to hear your nice case story. That's one of the stories that you
nice case.
Mike.
I'm
classic.
Embarrassed. I feel like Chad's going to make fun of my microphone.
It looks like the WJAZ Nightfly Donald Fagen microphone.
Have you seen
I like the new vibe there, Sean.
Are you at the foot of Mount Belzoni?
I need that to go with my profile picture.
Wait a second. I had two sources of audio going at once. It was very confusing.
So we're saying it looks like Donald Fagen, the Nightfly cover.
Yeah, and I was that reminded me of Sean's new advertisement for this whole series,
which is awesome. It's such a great recreation.
Well, thank you. I am a Nightfly. That's kind of a late night talk show. So thank you all for being on it. It's been a real treat to do this. I kind of started this when COVID started, you know, being a musician, it's been a real drag not being able to play any music. So I figured the least we could do is talk about it. And, you know, I've been doing that in writing for over 20 years at Progressive Ears. So this just seemed like the next step. And I always like to interview, but I hated the transcribing part. And this kind of cuts that out. You can just cut to the chase. So I love it. So thank you all for being part of this. I really appreciate it.
It's amazing
part of it.
everyone that you've
Thank
got.
all of you musicians for being part of NEARFest in varying and amazing ways over the years. And, you know, Chad and I started this journey as a couple of rank amateurs, and, you know, we built it into something amazing, and you guys were at the heart of it, all of you. So we're, you know,
Absolutely
indebted. It's
Man,
something
thanks
I
for
will
having
carry
us.
forever, and something proud and honored to, you know, have associated with you fine and illustrious musicians who, you know, still touch our hearts to this day.
I have to say that NEARFest was probably the most memorable show that we ever did.
Wow, and you did
was,
you know, shows for years and years
Yeah.
and years.
It was 26 years, the difference in when I stopped playing and when I started playing at NEARFest. And it was like being in my living room. It was just incredible. The vibe in that place was unbelievable.
What year did you play?
I think 2002, yeah. 2002.
Okay,
It was the year after 9/11,
gotcha.
because I had my bass painted in American flag.
Oh, nice.
Oh yeah. Well,
But
Mo,
boy-
I gotta say, one thing I remember from your performance at NEARFest, as we were probably, I don't know, an hour and a half from showtime. You guys were doing your sound check, and you came up to me backstage. You said, "So is our dry ice all ready to go?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Our dry ice. It was in the contract." I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about," and I panicked.
And he goes, "Go talk to Rob."
We tried
He goes, "Rob, where's our dry ice?"
I got to tell you, I don't remember having dry ice. I must have been joking with you.
Well, we tried everything we could, but as you know, on a Sunday or even on a Saturday night, Trenton shuts down. It's not exactly
The
the same
government
place.
town, right?
So there was nowhere to buy anything. I'd be lucky to get you a bag of ice from Wawa, let alone dry ice. And I was like, oh my God, we're gonna have this big reunion show, and I don't have their dry ice.
I don't think we needed the dry ice. It went just
wow.
great.
Well,
Made me
it's
crap a
the
brick.
hell out of me, okay?
So how long?
Is dry ice still a thing on stage? Was that? I
No,
don't-
They use the oil now. The oil.
I've not seen dry ice since the 70s.
Hey Mo, how long had it been since you guys had played together before that?
26 years.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's the magic of
And we started putting the band together in January, and we'd play every Sunday. We'd rehearse, and we'd all do our own. We made a CD up for everybody to learn, and then we got together. I don't know. You came to a couple of rehearsals, Larry, right?
Yeah, when
Well, I
Roy
was on
took
tour.
over, right? Because
Yeah.
it was the U.S. members all rehearsing, and Roy practiced on his own.
Right,
Then he
right.
took over.
And then we had a week before NEARFest where we all played together. An analogy that I use is you play tennis, and in January you start practicing because in June you're going to be in Wimbledon. You know, that's how it felt. You know, just getting the band together. And the other thing is we practiced a song and then we'd sit down, and then we'd practice another song and sit down. So we had no idea that we had 3 hours of music. We thought we had 2 hours of music. So it was quite interesting.
I remember paying the overtime bill to the venue at the end of the night.
I got to tell you, it must have been worth every penny, man, because I absolutely loved it.
They were hard asses at that venue.
Yeah.
They were.
The other thing I have to say about NEARFest, which pertains to you, Rob, anything that we asked for, you came up with.
Yeah, we wanted
Absolutely
to make it first
everything.
class in every way.
You guys were incredible.
That's what we always try to do.
I think that input is what made NEARFest so great. that you looked after the artist felt loved, you know. I mean, really.
That was where the thing is, you know.
Yeah.
It was a not-for-profit. We did it as a labor of love. We weren't counting our pennies at the end of the day to, you know, we had day jobs, you know, and it wasn't about NEARFest making money. It was about, you know, bringing together the artists and the fans who love them. And, you know, if the artists make some extra money because of sales or whatever, fine. Hey, you know, so that was the point.
Well, also in the philosophy, at least backstage, was no matter what your slot was in the lineup, you were going to be treated like a headliner.
Yeah.
You deserve to get every bit of treatment to make your performance as good as it could possibly be. We didn't care if you were the opener or the headliner. You were treated like a headliner, and you got your due on that stage, whether it was the lights, the equipment, you name it. We did everything we could to make everybody shine.
Yeah.
It really felt that way.
It was a very special gig. I just wanted you to know that. It was
Thank you, Mom.
It means everything. It really means everything. You know, Chad and I still sometimes, we're, you know, I'm having a glass of wine, he's having a beer, we're on Facebook at 11:30 at night just listening to music or whatever, and we're like, holy crap, what did we do?
Yeah.
And you know, it's
well, you've got a bunch of people here that all were part of it, so
I know, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
The level of talent I see across the screen here is just mind-boggling. I remember, I think it was at NEARFest. I think it was NEARFest 2012. I elbowed Chad and I told him, Chad, within 15 feet of us is Mike Keneally, Gary Green, Annie Haslam, Peter Hamill, Roger Dean, and Eddie Jobson. And he just turns around and goes, holy shit.
You guys know how to throw a party.
That was a hell of a lobby.
Least.
That was one hell of a lobby, I'll tell you that.
Oh, sure. One of the funniest stories, some of you who weren't at NEARFest 2012, Uranus, one of our opening bands from Belgium, comes over, and they have this rare chromatic accordion, and it was like constantly making an F note, you know, the F note. It was somehow broken on the inside. And Hugh Banton from Vandergraaf Generator is just sitting there, and he goes, you know, I fix accordions in my shop. I run like an organ and piano shop. I fix accordions all the time. Let me have a look. So he goes up to his hotel room. He gets a special set of tools, and there's Hugh Banton of Vandergraaf Generator doing surgery on this band's like $5,000 accordion in the hotel lobby the night before their show.
Wow.
Just nuts.
That's awesome. Hey, so Mike, what have you been up to lately?
Working on albums.
Anything in particular?
Yeah. I've got a solo record that I'm working on the last song for that right now. And might as well reveal, just found out that Malcolm Mortimer's gonna play drums on it.
Wow, cool.
Kind of jazzed about that. And a few days ago I finished up my work on the second MFTJ record with Scott Shore. So and then there's a stack this tall of other things that I need to do as soon as I get the solo record finished.
And what's the vibe of the new solo album?
It's 10 tunes. It's pretty darn melodic. It's, you know, it's not as weird as some of my stuff can get.
Nice. I love melody, Mike.
I know you do. Now that I have a recording rig at home, Brett, I can finally play on something for you if you want.
Thanks, brother. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, it's tunes. It kind of alternates between it's about half instrumental, half vocal, and some of it's very straight ahead, and the stuff that's most abstract is not as abstract as the weirdest of my stuff. So I think of it as a very melodic album, actually.
Do you have a working title yet?
Yeah, I'm gonna hold on to that for a while.
Okay.
Just to I changed my
surprise.
He asked me the same thing, Mike.
yeah.
Do you have Mike? Do you have like was there an impetus to the album? Like, was there something in your life that like made you kind of go in this melodic direction or anything, or not?
I mean, it's. I've done some albums that were very abstract, some albums that were super melodic, and it just kind of felt like time to do something that had a lot of that just felt clear.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that choice now, because the songs for this album have been in the works for about a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And now that I'm seeing the way it's all coming together, and now that I'm like working specifically on the last song of the record and knowing that it's the last song on the record and sort of creating it in the midst of everything that's happening right now, it feels like it's gonna bring the album really into a current place, and it's yeah, it was just a desire to do some more direct stuff, I think is where it came from.
And you said the last song on the record was the last one that you wrote. Are you actually going to do that? The last song that you wrote is going to be the last song on the record?
Yeah. Right now I'm just calling it the last song on the album. I'll come up with a better name than that.
No, I know what you mean, though. It's kind of weird how that happens sometimes, where you sort of get to a point, it's like, this is the period at the end of the album, and it just feels right.
Yeah, and and the more I looked at that name, because that's how I was referring to it as I was working on the lyrics for it and stuff, I just titled the file "The Last Song on the Album,"
Nice.
And there was something kind of, it sounds like a They Might Be Giants title or something, but it
And then your file on the computer is the last song on the album. Final. The hell with this.
The absolute last mix.
That's what I mean. Right now, I'm working on a mix of a song called "Celery." It's an instrumental that Steve Vai actually did a couple of guest solos for it, and
a song that you spend more calories listening to it
than recording it. Exactly.
Rob, you forgot the untitled last song of the album. Take 2, untitled last song of the album. Take 4, final version V5.
Yeah. I've done so many. I've done so many final mixes of this song "Celery" that the one I'm working on now is just called "No, Seriously, This Is the Final Mix."
_ copy.
Seriously, celery. Good.
Seriously, celery.
Tasty.
Yeah.
Hey, Annie,
Hudsonville, Michigan has a sign as you enter it saying it's the celery capital of the United States.
Oh man.
Well, somebody's got to be it.
Unlike Brett, my
refrigerator
is not in the same room, so I'll be right back.
Annie,
You better fix that.
I had a couple questions for you.
So he gets his steps in.
We were had some fans that were curious about working with the symphony versus just a regular keyboard player, and if there's any adapting you have to do it, or if it's just kind of like an easy thing to do.
Well, I don't read music. I don't write music.
Right.
I don't know anything about music. I'm just a singer in the band. No, I think
I don't even like music.
Yeah, what we did for the 2017 is we formed our own chamber orchestra. Like a couple of years, about 7 years ago, we got an email from the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in England, and they wanted us to do some shows with them again, which was kind of odd for them to come to us, but apparently we were one of their favorite bands to tour with. We did 4 shows in the 70s with them. We went on the road with them basically, and but the vast amount of money it would cost to do it, I mean, they're not going to pay us to do it. We'd have to pay them. The invite was lovely, but at a cost. And so we decided that we'd try it out with a smaller orchestra of people that we knew. Rev Tessar is the keyboard player in the band now, and the MD. He knew all these musicians, great musicians from New York and New Jersey. And we put this orchestra together, 10 musicians, and it was incredible. I know that the keyboards, like Rave is the piano player and some synth, and then Jeffrey Langley plays synthesizers. So I think, we did 10 shows in October last, and 5 of them with orchestra. But when we played with the orchestra, they had to adapt what they were playing because the orchestra was going to be playing what they normally play, you know. So that was kind of, I would imagine, as I don't write music, it blows my mind how people can even do it, to be honest, you know. It came out fantastic. But there's nothing like it for our music. Even, you know, in the 70s, once the first time we did Ashes Are Burning and we played Carpet the Sun and the orchestra was playing along, I thought I was going to wet myself. Excuse my French. And John Tout said the same, and he was standing next to me.
Renaissance 4, brought to you by Depends.
That's right.
It's all them knickers, you know.
Okay, I have one more question for you. Any memories of Carnegie Hall that popped to mind?
Oh my God, yeah, that was quite incredible. Everybody, like in the 70s, you know, a lot of people used to come to the shows dressed in jeans and t-shirts, and you know, not many people dressed up really, you know. But when people came to Carnegie Hall, we did 3 nights. Everybody was dressed up to the nines. It was like, and you could see it just stood out so much, but it was incredible. Even down to rehearsal, we had a choir with us as well, and we rehearsed with the choir, and they were looking to me to conduct them. And of course, you know, I'm good with timing myself, but anyway, I managed it. But I just remember that standing out as being a very exciting time. And we did 3 shows there. And after the 3rd, the music was, you know, it was, I wish we hadn't, I don't know, something about Ashes Are Burning seems to fit in the venue. It did with the fans, but it was kind of the actual track itself. I think it went on too long. The solos were lasted 3 days, you know, and that kind of thing. But it was wonderful. Yeah, and then we went to this club called Ashley's afterwards, and then we found out who were the dancers in the band and who weren't, and who were the drinkers. And me and Terry both. People kept bringing us. We stayed up dancing in this club called Ashley's, and Terry's a great jiver. You know, spinning. You've got to be really good at jiving. You can't not be good at it. You know what I mean? You either can do it or you can't. He was brilliant, and we got on so well. So I think we danced for about 2 hours, and people just kept bringing us drinks, and we carried on drinking.
Would you say Ashley's were burning?
Oh.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Out of here. See you later.
We'll be here all night, folks.
It was great. You know, those were the days of the limousines, and the record labels, and there was money then for everything. I didn't realize that we were paying for a lot of stuff. You know?
Excellent.
But you don't realize that, do you really? But it was fantastic. It was breathtaking. Like the Albert Hall was the same kind of thing. You know?
I can imagine. That's amazing. Yeah. One more question. We had a question come in online wondering about your collaboration with Steve Howe on Turn of the Century and how that came about.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Oh, right. That was, I think it was Magna Carta Records.
Yeah.
Magna Carta, and they contacted me, and they wanted me to do Turn of the Century, and they also wanted me to do Ripples, because they were doing 2 different albums, Genesis Tribute and the Yes Tribute. And the time I met Steve before then was in the 70s. I hadn't met him for many years. And we got on very well. A guy called David Biglin, who was in my band at the time, produced it. And I think the production on it is fabulous, as is Ripples. And it was, you know, that's how I got to know Steve. And then, you know, I put on that Lilies in the Field benefit concert in '97.
Oh, yeah.
And we wrote the title track, and that was that. And then that's when we decided we were going to write an album together. And I went to England, and we started to write. And we had some really fabulous things. And then there was a phone call from John Anderson wanting to get Yes back together, and so that was the end of it. It didn't go any further, unfortunately.
Larry, does that cat have a registered trademark like you do?
No, he doesn't. But he,
What's his name?
Hey, fellas, how you doing, darling?
I'm good.
What the hell?
My cats are named Neil Pert, Purrt, Alex Nine Lifeson, and Getty Polydactyl because he has 24 toes.
Stretching it, man.
I wouldn't expect any less from you, Rob.
You are a true nerd. I love it.
You thought my Ashleys were burning joke was bad.
Yeah.
It was awful, actually.
Hey, Mo, I was curious if we could talk a bit about the new version of Nectar and tell us a bit about the new lineup and how things have been.
It's all dry ice, Sean. It's all
No
dry
ice.
It is.
Dry ice and liquid.
Crushed
liquid-
ice.
Well, Ron called me up and he said, will you help me put a band together? So I called up Rich Shalando, who used to play with Flying Dreams. And he also was Fire Ballet. I don't know if you remember Fire Ballet.
Oh, yeah.
From the early days.
Yeah.
And we played together in 78. So I give him a call. I said, we're putting a band together, Nectar, do you want to be in it? He said, sure. So the three of us went down to the studio and we played, and it was incredible. Day one, we knew we had something. So then I called Randy Denbo, who was the bass player after me, and I asked him if he wanted to be in the band because we fancied doing something with two basses, and I didn't know if I was going to go on the road or not. You know, I had no idea. So Randy came in, and he plays 12-string guitar, and he plays bass pedals and bass, and he's a great bass player. It really made a difference in the band. So then we were looking for a keyboard player, and I talked to Rich, and Rich said, well, the guy who plays with us, Kendall, he's really good. I said, well, ask him to come down and play with us. So he came, and after 10, 15 minutes, we knew he was the guy. He's brilliant keyboard player. So we played in the studio. A friend of ours, John Curlin, has a studio, and he'll let us have it for free. And we would go down there every week and would write music. We'd bring pieces of music in from the 78 when we used to rehearse in my basement. And within maybe 8 months, we had the album how we wanted it. So we started trying to generate money because we wanted to record it on our own terms. And we found this studio, really incredible place. And we did the album, and we got it out. We got it on vinyl, and we got it on CD. And then we started having problems with this German band who raped our name, you know. So that sort of held everything up in Europe. And luckily, or unluckily, whichever, right now we're in a limbo. And we're hoping to get everything re-released again. The album re-released. The album's called The Other Side, and it's the story of the other side. That's it.
I've heard it so far.
That's
and
my
I think
spiel.
it's awesome.
Yeah, it's excellent.
It is pure nectar for sure.
All the tracks were live. So
Awesome.
if you listen to Drifting, for instance, Drifting was live in the studio, first take. That was it.
You
We
guys
played
had
it.
to woodshedded it a bunch to make that happen before that.
I'm sorry?
You guys must have been, practiced the tar out of that to make that happen.
We played every week. Every week we played, and it just got better and better and stronger. And we're still writing stuff in the studio, getting it so that it was just right. But it was great. It was great.
It's a good point. It's a rare thing these days that, I'm an audio engineer. It's rare that bands play live anymore. We did an album called The End is Beautiful with one of my bands. And we rehearsed like Rob's saying, and we went in and we did like maybe 3 to 4 takes of every song in 2 days, and we cut the whole album in 2 days. But it was a live performance, like you're saying, dude.
Right.
Like, it's great. Like you can feel that tangible, energy of like being on the edge of like, right and wrong. I love that. It's great.
Every one of the Nectar albums were done live.
That's cool.
We
Well, that's
did all
what
of them.
cool, yeah.
The first one we did, Journey, that was 40 minutes. We couldn't stop because there was no Dolby, there was no DBX. You couldn't stop. If any of you guys are in the New Jersey area, Surefire Studios, Joe DeMille is awesome. He's got all the old gear, but he's got the modern technologies to go with it.
Right.
He's a magician, that guy. So yeah, we're very happy with what we got, and I think it was a good follow-up. I think to Recycled. It had a good story, and hopefully when we get this virus out of the way, we can get it on the market.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
Keep an eye out for it because it's
Yeah.
Hey, folks, I'm starting to turn into a pumpkin out here. It's lovely to see everybody in the same virtual room again. You guys are all important to me in very important ways. So see you guys down the road. Maybe we'll do something like this again soon.
I have to say it was fantastic. I'm meeting you guys. I've not met you guys before.
You too.
But I know Annie well, and Larry and Chad, and of course Mr. Rob, and Phyllis, who was lurking in the background there. But it was nice to meet you guys and hear what you're doing.
All right, cheers, folks. I'm out.
Bye.
Thanks for
Rob.
Take care, Rob.
I'm going to be out in a bit too.
Bye, Annie.
It was great to meet you. Great to meet you.
Annie,
Yeah.
nice to see
Annie,
you.
look after yourself, darling.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Annie.
Hi, Annie.
Mike,
Bye, everybody.
Mike, take care, brother. Good to see you,
See you,
dude.
Bo.
Bye, Larry. Bye.
Bye. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Okay.
Well, if anybody wants to stick around for a few minutes, we've got time.
I can stick around for a couple of minutes.
Okay, that's cool. So, Larry, do you ever speak to Peter anymore?
Actually, Phyllis, my wife, was talking to him last weekend
That's awesome.
because she was coordinating things with the interspecies internet, which is Peter and I both do a lot of stuff that's not music. And one of his projects has to do with animal intelligence and communicating over the internet. So it's she was up until recently coordinating the Facebook pages and the various scientists. So yeah, they're in touch. She was in touch more than I have been because most of the people I have to deal with in the real world, it's just about where's the royalty statement, that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, those first 4 albums are magic, and I think, I think he got a little more commercial after that, and it was fantastic, but it was kind of the end of an era. And I was just wondering if there's one of those that you particularly like the best out of all these years later.
We bought my first house, so I like that. No, but it was also kind of a breakthrough because a lot of the things, Peter had asked me to work with him right at the time he was leaving Genesis. I was backstage with the band during the Lamb tour, and we got to know each other pretty well, and the management thing, and all the pieces fell into place. And so when he asked me to work on the first solo album, Bob Ezrin assembled most of the musicians, but Peter had invited me and Fripp to not be part of the Bob Ezrin core team. He had the same session musicians that did Alice Cooper and Kiss and a lot of the things that he worked on. So this was going to be, he was going to plug, I shouldn't say plug it into the formula, but Peter was going to work within the Bob Ezrin world. And there were ideas that Peter was talking about, like no cymbals and some of the approaches he wanted to take.
The first album he was talking about
on
doing?
the first album. And
Wow.
Bob said, no way, we're not doing that. I've been making records. I got multi-platinum records under my belt. And, you had your artsy band with the, wearing dresses and fox heads and stuff, but you haven't done what I've done. You haven't taken acts to this level. So we're going to do it my way. And then the second album rolled around, and it was Fripp producing, and he had a whole different idea. Third album comes around, and Steve Lillywhite, with Hugh Padgham engineering, although Hugh would go on to become a fairly significant producer in his own right. And the interesting thing was they were just a little bit younger. They were Genesis fans. And Peter said, "I'd like to try this." And they went, "Okay." You know, you're the cool guy. And they were very accommodating, but they weren't just rolling over. If something was a dumb idea, they wouldn't go for it. And I was invited to be in the team, and the tracks were cut, and then the rest of the band went home. And I stayed on for months. I mean, just literally from the summer all the way through Christmas. Then we picked up after Christmas in 1980. And the problem was the album was supposed to be done and out by the fall of 1979. And the tour was booked, the first leg of the tour through the UK. And the record still wasn't done. So we started the tour playing the album, but nobody had really heard it. So that was kind of a challenge. And then went back in the studio after that first couple of months leg was done and wrapped it up. And then we had it, they rushed it out in time in the US for the US leg of the tour in the summer of 80. But it did very well. I mean, the first single one, it was the first #1 that Peter had as a solo. The album did really well. I was being the kind of idolizing the Beatles. We knocked McCartney out of #1 in the UK. And it was like, oh, I feel bad that it was McCartney, but yeah, we're getting somewhere here.
He could take it.
And
we'll
that
have
was
another time later.
That was the first one I had a producer's role on the record as well. So that was very gratifying. And then the fourth one was in some ways an extension of that. Same philosophy, slightly different team, but overall that was, you know, the same thing. I thought it was.
And there's a hi-hat on Wallflower.
Yeah, there's a little bit here and there, things snuck back in. But you know, the funny thing is, Wallflower was cut for the third album, originally.
Oh.
Completely different arrangement with Phil Collins doing really big bombastic drums, and it was a killer track, but it didn't have lyrics. So of course the lyrics set the tone once Peter wrote those.
Is there like any significant amount of unused material from?
There was a lot.
Wow.
We did. I was just counting up that I had done an interview for the Recording Academy, the Grammy organization. They had contacted. They had a very good writer who had contacted me, Lillywhite, and Padgham separately, and we all gave fairly long phone interviews. And then he wove it together into an article. And thank goodness we did not contradict each other. All of our stories dovetailed beautifully. So we all remembered it pretty much the same way. But you know, while we were doing that, I was pulling up a couple of pictures to see whether there was anything they could use in the article. And there was one that inadvertently was actually, he needed a shot of the Fairlight because we had the prototype Fairlight CMI digital synthesizer. And taped to that, or taped to one of the stands real near it, was the list of all the working titles. And I think we had 17 songs we were working on.
Wow.
So some of them, like Milgram's 37 was, I actually like that better than the kind of cleaned up version that ended up on So 7 years later. But it was more haunting, and it was spookier. It had a baby. One of the people in the entourage had a newborn, was recorded and then slowed down on tape.
Oh, that's
and
a good
if
sound.
you've ever heard a crying baby down in the low registers, it's every bit of emotion and empathy and scary all at the same time.
Wow.
And that's going under it. So we had a lot of really interesting things on that. And there were songs that were partially developed that would later turn into, they would evolve into songs that showed up on later albums, or pieces of them would show up.
Yeah, so cool.
So yeah, there was always a lot of over-recording. 4 was the same way.
Yeah.
How much live footage is there of that lineup. I've seen the one where everybody's wearing the orange safety vests.
Yeah, we did Rock Palast, that was nerve-wracking. That was a huge Eurovision show. It was shot in Cologne or Dusseldorf, Cologne, I think. And but it went out live on a weekend evening, Friday night, I think. And it had an audience in the tens of millions. And we were just at the beginning of the tour. And it was, please don't screw up anything. I remember I had a very early Prophet 5 on that, and it had dropped its memory during the afternoon. So I was frantically reprogramming the sounds and hoping that they would hold through the show, and it did. It was fine. But that was one of the few ones. This came up too when I was pulling up old pictures. There was a live show recorded to 2-inch quad in Dallas in 1977. And I found pictures of me in the mobile truck, in the video truck, because I'm kind of a TV junkie now that I'm doing documentaries. That was always with me. And I have no idea what became of that. I never saw it. I don't know where it went. I don't know who was recording it. You could probably figure it out somewhere, but I guess Hit and Run Music might have some clue on that. But there wasn't a lot. There were people with early camcorders or, even some of these Sony helical scan black and white 1/2-inch machines that captured little snippets here and there, and people with sound 8mm film, but there's very little.
That's what I was thinking. And the one with the orange vest, that was for the second album?
Second album, yeah.
I thought so. Okay. It'd be
Saw
really.
that tour at
Did
the
you
Fox
tour
Theater.
behind every one of those albums?
Yeah. For me, yes. I mean, it was hundreds of dates with Peter. It was, we were still part of the older version of the music industry. Tried to do an album. By then, it should have been every year by the contract, but it was every other year. So you'd spend a lot of time recording and then tour it for a year.
You did a few tunes from the Lamb on that tour early on. Was that just because you guys didn't have enough originals to fill the setup, or was it more like, let's play a few Genesis tunes and throw some people some bones, or what?
It was both. It was. There were a couple of things. We had Strawberry Fields Forever, which Peter had done on that all this in World War II. So we'd worked that out. And then we had Ain't That Peculiar, which wasn't recorded on any of Peter's albums, as a cover. And we would use those to flesh out the set a little bit. And it was the Lamb and I guess the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was the one that was usually in there.
I think Back in New York was in there occasionally too.
Yeah, I think that showed up a little later, but those were the only two. And it was also, they really wanted to see Peter from his Genesis days. This was so early on. And he didn't want to get dragged back into just being the Genesis guy. But he understood his audience. You have to accommodate what people want a little bit. It's not just a one-way street.
Oh yeah, and I think just giving him something that familiar was, probably a nice touch. Definitely. Do you have any favorite covers from any of those 4 albums that you've heard? I'm sure Salisbury Hill's probably been covered ad nauseum by now. Any others come to mind?
Wow, I've never really thought about that. I'm trying to think. There were a couple of different versions of "Here Comes the Flood" that had showed up, and for some reason, I think even Bette Midler did that.
Wow!
And I worked with her on a TV special in the '80s, and I don't ever remember talking to her about it. But
has anyone covered Humdrum?
No, and it was interesting because I was thinking about that today. So it came up. One of the things I'm involved with is an organization called MEAP, which is in Pennsylvania. It's in Harleysville. And that's the organization for the preservation of synthesizer and electronic instrument history.
Okay.
We're the group, not out of my pocket, but that bought the Keith Emerson Monster Mode.
Wow.
And then loaned it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where it was on display for a while in their instruments collection. But we've been doing a lot of analysis on this, and one of the principals in the organization, I'm on the board, of that is a guy named Ben Luce, and Ben's father was the president of Moog Music after Robert Moog left Moog Music. And Ben is doing a scholarly history of the Polymoog. So I've been going over its background because I have one of the last surviving prototypes, not working right now. Going over details about that. And he just, shortly before this went on the air tonight, I got an email from Ben saying, with a list of songs saying, was Polymoog on this? And Humdrum was one of them.
Funny.
Said, was that? And I have to get back to him and say, no, it wasn't. That was modular mode.
Oh, okay.
Layered track by track in the studio. But then when I played it live, I used the
Gotcha.
Polymoog.
That's such a beautiful
It sounded
song.
big, but it this was more the traditional switched on box style recording, which I did a lot of with Peter Drums.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
We got a couple readers that are watching that mentioned a couple covers. My good friend John says, didn't Kate do a cover of Mother of Violence, Kate Bush?
Yeah, I think
Did you
she
hear
did.
that? I bet that was awesome.
Sure, I heard it, but
And Adam Holtzman and Randy McSteen recently did a great version of Here Comes the Flood on one of those stay-at-home kind of webcam kind of shows that was on about a month ago now, and I hear it was really stunning. So
Randy killed it. He sounds amazing on there. Adam does too.
He is a hot young talent. Yeah, keep an eye on him. His star is on the rise.
Yeah, Here Comes the Flood was interesting because Bob Ezrin wanted to put orchestra on everything. Not on everything, but on a lot of things. And it tended to be fairly bombastic and over the top. And I remember being at the sessions at Olympic, and then we went back to Morgan Studios that evening to listen to what was recorded. And Peter he just had this kind of look on his face. He did not, this was supposed to be a small, intimate little piece that lends itself to either a solo performer or a very small ensemble. And this thing was bombastic with crashing cymbals and flourishes everywhere, timpani. And I don't know that might have leaked out on a bootleg somewhere, but it never made it back to the album. Peter was able to put a nix on that. But, it's what it could have been. Producer's prerogative sometimes.
Yeah. Speaking of that, the legendary story of Ezrin taping Peter to a pillar in the studio. Is there any truth to that?
I believe it was. I wasn't there.
Okay.
I was there for most of the recording, most of the dates on that. And then I was already booked for an album that I had a production piece of called the Intergalactic Touring Band. We were wrapping that up back in New Jersey, and I had to leave Toronto, and I missed the last couple of days. And then Peter went back for vocals without any of the band people there. So it happened somewhere in there. But enough people who I trust, assistants on the date. And I'd been back at that same studio with working with FM when I was producing them. And everybody confirmed it. So I don't doubt that it happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was that tune, Modern Love. And I guess he just didn't think the take was quite passionate enough. So he figured he'd get him a little wound up by taping him to the pillar. So that's probably a one and only time that ever occurred in rock and roll. But
I don't know. At least in my circle, yes.
I'm curious. So Larry, you performed 3 times at NEARFest, Nectar, Tony Levin Band, and as Synergy. Right. Mike, you were there twice. I'm curious, what are your memories of your performances and your experience with the show?
I really enjoyed both of them, especially the second one though. The second one was very fun and exciting. It was really neat having Chris from Echolyn come up and play the Dolphins medley, and he just killed it. And there was no time to rehearse to speak of. And then Chris Myers, of course, from Humphreys, which I very much enjoyed symbolically, getting a member of Humphreys up on stage.
Yes, that was appreciated. My brain really appreciated that. I should say my heart appreciated that.
I'm gonna have Chris on next month, by the way.
Oh, Myers or Busby?
Myers.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So I just literally talked to him today. It's been about 5 years since we spoke, and he's like, "I totally remember you. Sure, I'd love to."
Yeah, that's great. He played unbelievable stuff on my last record, Scambot 2, and he's on the one that I'm about to put out.
Cool.
And we have this this crazy band that's been in gestation for about 5 years now, that we written a bunch of songs for, with a couple of the guys who used to be in Zappa plays Zappa, and Jonathan Sindelman, who's an amazing keyboardist. And so we've been meeting in secret and collaborating on songs. And when we're all allowed to play live again, we'll get out there and start playing all these songs we've been working on.
Oh, that's going to be
But
amazing.
yeah, Chris Mars is a beautiful guy. But
Yeah,
that's you know, Chad, I really can't thank you and Rob enough for the you know, just this platform that you've given so many musicians, and I have just incredible memories of NEARFest, not just playing, but watching other bands play. I remember just being off stage watching Van der Graaf and just being in utter disbelief. You
I
know?
was standing next to you, and you were like in a trance.
Oh yes, you were there, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I was on the crew that year.
I could not believe my eyes and ears, you know, watching Hugh's feet.
Man.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Angligard that year also blew me away. And you know, and hanging out with Gary Green and just the whole vibe of NEARFest. There was never anything else like it. And damn you guys for stopping that festival. But also, you know, Chad, I consider you a real friend, and
Thank you, Mike.
I really, you know, just treasure the times that we get to hang out and stuff like that, and really look forward to being able to do that again sometime.
Well, and I will put it out there again. When all this nonsense is over, the next time you're here on the East Coast, leave a day open. You and your band come here for some smoked meats of whatever kind of variety you're into that day.
There
Would
you go.
love to host you guys for a meal.
And golf.
I'm so
and I will warn you. Now, you were at my house one time years ago after the first NEARFest performance.
Mhm.
You and Scott, your manager. Congratulations to him on his nuptials, which is awesome.
So cool.
You guys came over to my house with Matt Urban to look at video of your performance at 04.
Right.
And if you remember, our dog Indigo really seemed to like you.
I do remember. I do.
Yeah.
I have a rapport with dogs. It's
Yes,
yeah.
she I believe she stood on your chest and licked your neck for about 20 minutes, which was ridiculous.
My new
And
album at the time was called Dog, and I think she just wanted to find out, you know, what's this guy about.
And I think you made a joke at one point that it was always lick o'clock.
That sounds about right.
It's possible to be too affectionate, but that's a fine dog, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, she has moved on, but we have replaced her with another cattle dog who's just as nutty, but in a different way. But but your comments about NEARFest and friendship are very taken to heart, and I appreciate them. I consider you and Larry and Sean, of course, as friends, and it wouldn't happen without this festival.
It's fantastic. Just an amazing thing.
It's changed so many lives for the better, you know,
Yeah,
and it's
really
great
has.
when music does that. You know, it has the power to elevate us and connect us, you know.
Yeah, I did a dry run on Zoom with Annie the other day. She was a little nervous about setting it up, and she said, and as a lot of people have asked me, do you guys miss it? And yeah, we missed the weekend. We miss seeing everybody. We miss seeing the artists and the joy that people have both on stage and off stage, and hanging out with people and the friends we've met over the years. We don't miss all the other worry, you know. What band's not going to get a visa? What's going to happen at the last minute? Somebody have to drop out. Or, you know, who needs 19 more keyboards at the last minute? You know, it was endless. You know, whoever, you know, it could be something silly. It's like, oh my God, what now? So we don't miss that stuff, but my God, do we miss the people and the music? You know, the live music. We had such a great time with our production crew putting together the show of that magnitude with what we could with the money we had, which was all, again, like Rob said, we were not for profit. Every dime we had went into production. We didn't take it home. We didn't want to take it home. It's not what it was about.
Yeah. So we should all just show up at Zellner and listen to records.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
Slumber party.
Oh, by the way, Mike, if you look over my shoulder here,
Yeah.
does that guy look familiar?
Oh, hey, Mike from 16 years ago.
Very nice, very nice. I like the poster back there too, Chad.
Oh, that one?
Yeah, Test for Echo. That's really
Echo
cool.
cover, yeah.
That is really nice. Hey, Larry, got one more question that came in. My friend Brian is wondering how it was recording and touring with Nektar on Recycled.
Oh, well, that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't as though I hadn't had experience, but I did this thing where I was in bands in high school, and then once I got in college and started doing electronic music and radio, I started working more professionally and more on the studio side. So I never really did the, paying your dues in the clubs or anything. And I went straight in the studio with Nektar to record Recycled the summer after I did the first Synergy album, which was just out at that point. No, I guess actually it was after the second Synergy album started getting on time. Let's see, let's get the time frame here. No, I recorded with them in summer '75, and they were really gracious in inviting me over for to the Chateau d'Aroville, which was where we started that project, and then that was one of my introductions to not everything in the music business is what you think it's going to be, because I thought this was this fabled French studio, and it was actually it was a gorgeous piece of architecture, but it was a horrible.
That was the place where Elton did Honky Chateau and
Right, so I figured,
Passion Play from Jethro Tull.
It's got to be great, right? No, the maintenance was horrible. By that time I was very involved with the House of Music, where I recorded my albums and later bought into the business. And so I knew how a studio should be run, and this was not run that way. And it was obvious. So the Peter Hauke, who was the producer on that album, moved us to Air Studios in London, George Martin's facility, which was the polar opposite. It was
sure
gorgeous, beautifully run. It was in their original location on Oxford Circus. But working with the guys was just great. I mean, they gave me very much a free hand in doing what I wanted to do. They knew they had a lot of Nektar albums under their belt by then. So they knew how the four of them would work, five with Mick contributing to the lyrics. And then one of their road crew, who was becoming a good engineer, Paul Higgins, and we've been good friends to this day. He and I would take the alternate shift. We'd stay up overnight, and I would just be working out arrangements and overdubbing. I had the synthesizers there, and then they would come in to do vocals, guitar overdubs, or whatever the next, when the sun was up for the next day, and hear what I had done. And I never knew whether it was going to be accepted and was it even any good, but I would say about 85% of it, they went, oh, that's great, let's use that. So it was very gratifying to me, and that process continued through the rest of the album. And then when it was time to tour it, they said, do you want to come out on tour? And it was, yeah, this would be great, I'd love to do that. And so I just got thrown in at the deep end, because I think the first date was a big indoor sports arena at Southern Illinois University.
And that was your first tour?
That was my first tour. That was the first date that I did. It first thing since playing like the YMCA in 12th grade with a little local band. And then the next thing was that. Although in the middle, just, in my own defense, I had been out on the road with Yes, doing some of the synthesizer designs with Rick Wakeman. There were other bands that were label mates. I was very familiar with the process. So
okay.
I wasn't coming in cold. I knew what I needed to bring on the road, and I had actually been out on the road, just not as a performer.
Gotcha.
So went straight in on that, and we did a lot of US dates and then Canadian dates. It was almost all the performing on that was in North America. And by then I'd been tapped by Peter and was planning to record on his first album the fall of that year up in Toronto. So I went into that, but I didn't know that Peter was going to be anything. I'd done a lot of sessions with a lot of bands, some who were famous, some who were not, where I'd come in and I'd do a song, I'd do an album, and I'd get paid, get my name on the album, and never hear from him again.
Mm-hmm.
For all I knew, that was what it was going to be with Peter. So, I just plowed ahead with the Peter thing. But then his management said, "Would you like to go on the road?" Cool. Yeah, I'll do that.
So Larry, when the Nectar Reunion came up for NEARFest '02, how early on were you contacted, and what was your feeling about that whole thing?
Well, I was all in for it, but I was touring still essentially with the Gabriel band, the Tony Levin band, which was the core of us from Peter's band,
Right.
and Jesse Gress from Todd Rundgren's band. And we were on our third album, I think, at that point. We'd done the Double Espresso album, and we were touring all the time. I mean, we were doing Europe, and we covered everything from Russia to Japan and everything in between. So it was pretty busy. And
it was a great tour.
And I just wasn't sure. I knew that I could bend the touring schedule for T-Lev a little bit by saying, look, I really want to block out NEARFest weekend with my old bandmates from Nektar. I want to do this, but I wasn't sure how much rehearsal time was going to be available. And as it turned out, it was kind of in the middle. What Mo was saying, they had started early in January, but none of them had been playing except for Ron, and there was more on a local level. So they really had to get back up to speed again. And I had been pretty much nonstop touring with the T-Lev band for a couple of years at that point. So the tour rig was together, and everything was set up. I had a whole work protocol, and by then, using the Kurzweil and a couple of other things, I had this stripped down rig that was very, very efficient and pretty bulletproof. And I knew I could just plug the Nektar repertoire into that.
Nice.
I'd have to take a week or so to patch and store it, put it on the zip disks that I was using with the Kurzweil then. But I knew it was all going to work. So, I was in as soon as I heard about it. I don't really have a memory of exactly when I heard, but it was early enough to make sure the T-Lev bookings didn't get in the way.
Nice.
And
then a few years later, we had Tony Levin band at NEARFest.
Right. And that was, and I guess that was around the same time we were doing Mexicali Live and a few other things. We just kept going with that. Whenever Tony didn't have to do a Crimson thing or a Gabriel thing, we'd be out there. And then but we were a little expensive to move around because we had more pieces. Eventually, his brother joined us, so it was a 5-piece. And the industry just isn't what it was. And so a more efficient way was for Tony to turn to his other love, playing stick, and form Stickmen. And that's a really tight little wonderful ensemble that they can, they could turn on a dime and head off to South America or go to Japan for one date if they needed to. And they weren't quite as flexible.
Have you heard anything about Jesse? I know that he's been not very well lately.
Yeah, he's got a very bad lung condition, and he's at home, somewhat stabilized right now, and they're looking at various medical options. He's being tested. There's a GoFundMe campaign because, like most musicians, no matter how hard you work, sometimes the resources just aren't there.
Yep.
But we're hoping for the best. Phyllis and I spoke with him. She's very good. Jesse's wife, Mary Lou, who was Todd's tour manager for many years, and our two couples are friends. And so it's a matter of staying in touch. Phyllis and Mary Lou talk, and last time we put both sides on speakerphones a couple of weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and Jesse sounded great. He was himself, sounded funny and happy.
I love Jesse, man. He's a great guy.
So he just wants to get back to playing, and we are just got our hopes that medical science will make this possible. COVID makes it even more difficult. His isn't related to that, so the idea is to keep him safe from that.
Yeah.
But just getting into hospitals is difficult for anything at this point.
Sure. Well, he's in our prayers, and we wish him a complete recovery for sure.
And he's a Bethlehem kid originally.
Oh yeah,
Lehigh Valley, yeah.
Wow.
In fact, I met Jesse with my first band that was going for a deal in the summer of 1973, and I graduated college in Easton, and I didn't move out of my fraternity house with the band. With Frank Urbaniak from Fractal Mirror, he was the drummer, and we just stayed in the fraternity house, so we got thrown out at the beginning of the next semester. But our bass player, who was also from the Allentown, Bethlehem area at that time, was friends with Jesse, so Jesse came by for one of our.
Wow.
Amazing.
It was the beginning.
Mike, does Easton, PA ring a bell to you?
Did we hang out there?
We had lunch at a place called Porter's.
Oh, okay.
We
I remember the lunch, but didn't remember the name of the town.
Yeah, we snuck out for a lunch. I took Mike and a couple other folks out to a really great place down the hill from Lafayette, Larry, just off the Circle, up Northampton Street.
Yep.
Called Porter's Pub, just a phenomenal place.
I do remember that meal. It was great.
You guys are making me hungry.
Sorry.
I got one more quickie and then we'll wrap it up. Another one for Larry. One of my readers at Progressive Ears, who calls himself Ancient Chord, writes in and says, your contribution to NEARFest performance with Nektar was stunning. Just to hear you perform Recycled itself was tear-inducing. In my opinion, it's better than the studio version. I know you did a solo performance also at NEARFest. I do understand the difficulties of being a one-man show, but would you ever consider doing more solo concerts? NEARFest proved you could pull it off.
Oh, yeah. I've been challenged many times that going back, to the late 70s, you should do a solo show, but I had crafted these things. So there were a couple of marks along the way of how this went together. One of the, one of my mentors and one of my closest friends in the whole electronic music field is Wendy Carlos. And Wendy had been a studio crafting composer. And that's really how I envisioned myself when I first got started in my career. And Wendy swore she could never pull off Switched on Bach or any of these other pieces live until 1997, when she was challenged to appear in a Bach festival at the Beacon Theater in New York, a one-off called Bach at the Beacon. And she put a small ensemble together of players to play the various parts. And it was people like Jordan Rudess was in it. I was part of it. There were 8 of us, Gloria Chang from the LA Philharmonic.
Amazing, man.
And we did this one performance of the, everybody was conservatory trained except for me, by the way, which was a killer. I mean, Wendy's got a master's in composition from Columbia, and, Jordan was without peer. So the amount of practice I had to put in back to my old private piano lessons days, I thought the third Brandenburg was going to kill me. But I did do it. I didn't make any mistakes. And it kind of got me thinking, wow, we could do this. What we did in the studio with the patchable modular Moogs in the 70s and the 60s, in Wendy's case, is possible now. So this was 1997. And the next thing that came up was there was...
I'm sorry, Larry, is that Wendy Carlos you're talking about?
Wendy Carlos, yeah.
Here's nerd alert. Love the original Tron soundtrack.
Oh, good. Well, that's great.
I do.
She did a great job on it. So,
all right, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I've been challenged a couple of times, and there was the Alpha Centauri Electronic Festival in Holland. I don't know if you guys were familiar with that.
Heard of it.
The NEARFest, you guys. They had contacted me a couple of times and said, we want you to do a solo synergy thing. And I kept going, I can't really do it. Or I'd have to get like 8 musicians to do it, like this Wendy Carlos thing. But then Tony Levin said, do you think you could do something using sequencers in the Tony Levin band set? I want to, pick one of your songs and you can pull.
Oh, I know where you're going.
So I realized, we ended up doing 2, but in the first tour, I picked one of the pieces that I knew was relatively easy and would fit inside the Kurzweil's, the original K2000 sequencer. And I could put in like 15 parts and play the 16th and see whether the audience liked it or not. And I just thought it was kind of cheating and wasn't very, I knew it sounded good, but I just thought there's something wrong with the ethics of this. And we did it across country. I was prepared to jump from the set after the first night. And they loved it.
Yep.
We kept doing it. Well, Alpha Centauri calls me up about a year later and goes, "We know you can do it because we saw it. Could you do the whole set?" So the more I thought about it, was, I probably can. So I did the thing in Holland, pretty close to what I ended up doing at NEARFest 6 years later. And
so why do you agree to us? Because we were such close friends, and you knew we'd.
Yeah, it was basically. One, I knew I couldn't bullshit you that I couldn't do it. And I had already done it, and probably 3/4 of the work was done and stored on the disc.
Nice.
These were MIDI performances out of a sequencer, so everything was being generated. Sound was being generated live out of the synthesizers, but it was still cheating as far as I was concerned, because I'd always leave the easiest, least screw-upable part for myself to play live. And then some of them later, like Phobos and Deimos, which we did in the Tony Levin band contest.
Version is so freaking amazing.
So
I love
that one, which had been an all electronic production when it was recorded in '78. But we broke out the parts. Tony took what had been the synth bass part, and he learned it on stick. And Jerry Murata created this incredible drum part. And Jesse was able to pick up some of the guitar-like sounds that were the solo-y things. And I realized that a lot of what was left over were things that had been sample and hold sequences. They were kind of randomized things, and I could make very extended loops that I could make the play on the keyboard.
Do you realize you actually had to play something?
Yeah, so I had to, well, I had to do a bit of work, but we were able to pull that off. And then I realized in order to perform that at NEARFest, I just had to throw the original parts, the electronic parts, back in, since I wouldn't have the other guys.
That was always one of my favorite Synergy tracks. And when that showed up with Tony Levin Band, I was blown away.
So you can thank Tony for that. He picked that.
That's great. I have to ask, Larry, if you've had any contact with Wendy since since that performance.
Not since yesterday.
Really?
All the time. No, she's wonderful. We have these long 2-hour phone conversations about politics and electronics and getting older and Bob Moog and reminiscences of the early days.
I can't tell you how delighted I am to hear that, because there's zero word.
No, she's reclusive to the world by choice. She's a brilliant mind. She's one of my favorite people, much less composers. And I didn't know her at the beginning of her career, but got to know her fairly early on through mutual friends. And I just value her friendship enormously. It's a very big influence. It's a probably closer to my own mindset, the way she views composition and performance, than the rock and roll world, which I love. And she really doesn't have any part of that. That's somewhat foreign to her world. But,
sure.
Where the Beatles were an inspiration, but so was Stravinsky for me. And,
right, of course. Yeah.
So were some of the electronic composers. Both of us have a kind of an interesting thing, because we do see the electronic composers out of the academic world and realize that, Wendy being a physicist, and I hold a number of patents in infrared transmissive technology, electrical engineering patents, and had worked on the designs. And we realize that there are composers in the academic world who are so awed by the electronics that they don't really understand. They don't really get it. They're thinking of it more in the composer's world rather than what's in the guts of it. That, we kind of share this thing that they don't have the ability to parse the aesthetic. And I think that's what makes her music so good.
It's so beautiful. It's so vibrant. And I guess I was 7 when I had switched on Bach, and then that album just did such a number on my head when I was a kid. And I realize now when I go back and listen to it, and the many albums that came out afterward, how much the effect that had on my aesthetic and just what I think sound is, and it's just incredible. I'm really, really happy to hear that.
No, her standards are so high too, and that was something that I knew having her as a friend, I couldn't play her something if it wasn't up to those standards. She would laugh at me, or she would actually berate me, you know, in a polite way, but she would do it. But,
the bar is way high.
Yeah, sort of a college professor attitude. And both in the sonics, the extreme clarity of her studio, and the excellence of performance and not cutting corners.
Right.
And, you know, there was always that, well, that's good enough for rock and roll attitude.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really do that.
Yeah.
So,
So cool.
So it was good to absorb that in there. But no, she's really good. Have you heard Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah. Yeah.
She cuts some territory with microtonal work that
it's probably more affecting than any other microtonal music I've heard in some ways. It just gets into your marrow. It's so deep.
And I think that's because if you guys haven't heard it, these are using tunings that are not the standard equal temperament 12 notes that we're used to. Now, she's not the first one to do that. There have been lots of experiments with that over the years. But Wendy found a way in her own mind to find what worked in the alternate tunings, where a lot of the other alternative tuning composers just are so awed by it's an alternate tuning, anything must be interesting. And that's not really the case. Some of it is interesting. Some of it's kind of awful. That's why we don't use those kind of stuff.
A lot of it's pretty unlistenable.
Requires a component.
It's
mindset,
it's not always pleasant. Even what Wendy wrote, sometimes it's very jarring and disturbing. Yeah. But it works. She's transmitting emotion through the composition, and then this impeccable recording.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's out of print right now, but encouraging her to get it back in print.
Hey, our good friend Andre.
Right?
I'm sorry, Mike.
That's okay.
Andre's on?
Yeah, Andre is in the lobby, and he just wanted to say the Synergy albums are still in high rotation around his house and still set an incredibly high bar in composition and creativity, sound design, production, and just fun. Thank you, Larry. Those records were an early education. Liner notes taught us a lot about gear far before the internet.
Thank you, Andre. I'm very appreciative of that. And I think to the best of my recollection, I met Andre through NEARFest.
Oh yeah, Andre was there with Eddie Jobson a couple of years in a row, and maybe some other folks too. I can't remember now, but yeah, when we saw that wonderful UK set to wrap up NEARFest with the band.
Yeah, well, that was the wrap up. But I think Andre was around in prior years with other acts, and maybe
he was.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then there was the late night jam, the last one. Remember you did that Ornette Coleman version of Red from King Crimson, Mike?
I remember it well. Yeah, that was a good
there you go. And I
was playing shows with Andre back in the mid '90s with Beer for Dolphins and Project Object in Asbury Park, man.
That was a great jam. I remember Chad got up there and played some drums, and I
remember. I just blocked that out.
If the after show party counts, I'm the last guitarist that ever played at NEARFest.
There we go.
At 3 in the fucking morning or whatever it was. So, wow. Well, thank you all for being part of everything. This has been a great way to look back on my favorite festival. And I'd say if anybody, laments NEARFest not being around, go to Prague Day because it's as close as you're going to get. And it's
I would concur.
Institution.
It is a beautiful vibe. I played there last year, and it's lovely there.
It's
That's
fun.
a fun place.
I get upset when I think about all the NEARFests that I didn't just go to listen to the bands and hang out.
And I
only
think
went when he was playing.
Well, that's why Larry came every year, Mike.
Yeah.
If I had on the East Coast, I would have been there. Man.
I'm sure you would have. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, it's true.
I think the Prague Day model might work too in this COVID era and beyond. It's all outside.
They got a big field you can spread out.
That's got to be this. It's like I personally don't want to play inside yet, but outside with distance, I think it could be okay. I'll just put a fan behind me that blows out away from me. That's
when it all comes back, MEAP, which I was telling you about, the Electronic Music Organization, is building a performance space, a state-of-the-art studio has an incredible collection of synthesizers that set things off in history. They're separate organizations, but very cooperatively with the Bob Moog Foundation, which is another one of my my passions. And hopefully this performance space, because there is this kind of predilection for electronic music and the prog side of things, that's probably who's going to populate that performance space as things come forward.
Larry, is that the one in Harleysville?
In Harleysville, it's in an old.
That's not too far from me. I mean, I would love to see that. I would love to see that space.
It's closed down right now, of course, because
sure, of course.
And the goal is to eventually make it a museum that would be open to the public. But of course, everything's on hold while COVID's being dealt with. But the spaces are there. There's a wonderful space. When the Emerson Monster Moog was acquired, and it was put back together by some of the Moog engineers who had originally built it. And then they threw what we called Emerson Weekend. And it was a 3-day affair. And everybody was there. The Emerson family, the kids and grandkids. Michelle Moog Kusa was up. There were about 100 invited guests.
I invited Michelle to crash tonight, but I don't know if she got my email.
No. I was supposed to talk with her on Zoom yesterday on Friday, but we just had scheduling conflicts, so we kicked it down the road. But Rachel Flowers was playing. Wally, well, you know him better as Gautier.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And so there was a little pickup ensemble that did some of the ELP stuff with Wally singing the Greg Lake parts. And it was just chills up the spine with the original instruments. So that was sort of a foretaste of what's coming later in the early 20s once MEAP goes. You can see a lot of this at the website, which is meap.org. And it's definitely worth checking out. An awful lot of classic instruments.
Speaking of Emerson's modular, we have the claim to fame, according to his road crew, of having his modular Moog the highest off the ground that it ever was.
Oh, really? Okay. It's a big instrument. I wouldn't want that toppling over.
No, it was quite the feat to watch that thing be, I'll call it built. And I think then he had just been given, I think it had just been given the Moog Award at that time, around 2006. And he put that way up on top of it. So his whole performance, the little statue or the award was sitting up on top of the modular.
That would have been around, because I know he had done one of the Moog Fests around that time too, when it was still in New York, before it went down to North Carolina. So, that's great. But these are all good stories, and they're all kind of interlocking. It's a lot of the same people, and it's a lot of the same tradition. And now it's moving into an area where MEAP's being run as a nonprofit. So the spirit of NEARFest is in there. And I'm even kicking around the idea of, since labels aren't really profitable anymore in the more esoteric ends of music, that we might want to look at developing a nonprofit label under that umbrella to keep significant records in print, which have a good chance of just falling out as the artists stage out and the audience becomes too small for a major label to keep it going, or even boutique labels. And the same thing with the performance space. And so your expertise in nonprofit promotion might be very handy.
I would be thrilled to be involved if you need me.
Well, when we get geared up again, I'm kicking some ideas around there. Right now, I'm more involved in the engineering history of it and trying to keep all that, get that documented. I mean, one of the things that's been going on is there's an engineer named Jim Scott who was with Moog. He was one of the little band of brothers that were in the original storefront in Trumansburg near Cornell when this all started.
I've vacationed there. I've been in Trumansburg. And Michelle reminded me that's where her dad grew up.
Well, that's where he finished college, got his PhD there. But anyway, the whole point was Jim is in his 80s now. He looked like Santa Claus, shoulder-length white hair, big full beard. He lives in Alaska, out in the middle of nowhere, but he was brought in and he was actually staying at the AMIAP facility. And he was able to see, because they've gone on an acquisition spree, they have prototypes of all the original Model A, B, C, up through the Model D Mini Moog as it was designed. And Jim was really the principal engineer on that project, because Bob Moog didn't want to build it. In fact, he was very pissed off when he found out he'd been away, and they started building this thing.
That's funny.
And Jim was very funny, very candid. He chewed everybody out badly.
Wow.
You know, and Bob was from Queens. He knew how to chew people out. So, and it turned out to be a spectacularly successful project. They were hoping to maybe sell 100 of them, and they sold 14,000 in the first run. But so Jim has been doing oral histories. He's able to look back at his proto boards. He had showed me when I was up at the factory around 75, a prototype memory Moog. It was a single voice, but with memory storage before the Prophet 5, before anything else. That was killed by the parent company. And so we've been trying to piece that project back together. There's a couple of surviving prototype parts that MEAP has. So, you know, we're trying to put all this together, and it's not just that. Moog, of course, is the centerpiece of all of this, but our, figures in heavily. Dina Perlman is now part of, which is Alan R. Perlman's daughter, and she's part of the circle now.
Nice.
You know, Tom Oberheim's in on it, Dave Smith. There's a lot of the pioneers in synthesis.
Outrageous.
So it's absolutely worth checking out. Keep an eye on what we're doing, but visit the website and sign up for the newsletters if you want.
Spell it for me again.
EMEAPP.org. Electronic music and I forget. It's the acronym stands for something, and it's a bit of a stretch, but EMEAPP.org.
Cool.
Electronic Music Education and Preservation Project.
That's it. And it's a father and son team, Vincent Papillo, Sr. and Jr. And they're really the driving force behind it.
Wicked.
Awesome. Hey, Chad, quick question.
Yes, sir.
How many videos are released of NEARFest sets? And I know the Nectar. This
Well,
is it,
we released the 2005 set. The
yeah, kind of a best of. It had Kenso
kind of competition thing. That's the only one we did. IQ has put theirs out, which actually I watched last night. It's essentially the 15-year anniversary of that, of their second performance. The Nectar one that you just held up has put theirs out. Cabezas de Sarah put theirs out. FM put their live show out on video. I'm trying to think if anybody else has done video. That might be it.
Is it safe to say that video wasn't rolling all the time? It was kind of a sporadic thing for
video was sporadic up through about 03, 04. This guy, the Studio M, Mobius New Media, Studio M, they started recording things sporadically in 03, maybe even earlier than that. I know they had talked to Mike and they recorded his show to video in 04, which is what we talked about earlier. He came over to review some of that video at my house at that time. And then beginning in 05, everything was recorded with permission from the artists. So everything from 05 on is somewhere on tape.
Do you think you might ever do another one of those kind of best ofs like the one you did for that one year?
I think it's unlikely.
That was really cool.
Yeah, the financials are part of it. My NEARFest Records thing I folded a couple of years ago. It just, life got busy. I wasn't really going to put out a lot more. It was tough for me to go and produce discs and then have to store 1,000 of them in my house and ship them out and do all that stuff on my own. It got very difficult.
And, you know, with young kids, they're now 12 and 15. But even now, you know, half my week is either, you know, if I'm not at work, I'm shuffling somebody off to lacrosse practice or soccer practice. So it just got too much. I have a lot of, I mean, if I tilt this down, actually, you'll see there's a pile of recordings right there. I've got a lot of the audio still sitting around here. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'd like to offer it up to the bands and let them do something with it. But even that process is slow. You know,
Okay. Yeah,
I would love to get out there, and I don't want to make money off of it. I'd rather the bands do something with it, produce it the way they want to produce it, and put it out. You know, if any bands are listening, contact me. I'll get you your stuff.
Well, that's good to know.
My stuff's still there, sitting in the can, and it just didn't really make much sense putting out the same stuff yet again, and going through all the expense. And the experience I've had, because I've been doing, you know, radio and TV over the years, going back to when I got hired on at XM before they were even on the air, and PBS documentary that I was a producer on and wrote. That still PBS has it till 22, but we got their lock on the streaming rights and stuff expired, and so we put it out on Blu-ray and DVD. Nobody was buying. People just aren't buying documentaries that way anymore. But we're on Amazon Prime now, and a couple other platforms, and that's doing pretty good.
That's cool.
So you know, it's at this point, it's like I know exactly what you're saying, Chad. Don't want to have boxes in the garage. Don't want to have to go down to the post office or UPS. You know, it's just get the masters up on streaming platform and just let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I had any experience with, you know, mixing or any kind of studio work, that would be a great hobby to go through these, get clearance from the bands and put them out there. And again, not for my own wallet at all. I would love people to hear this stuff again and have it in their collections, but it would cost money for me to do anything with it unless the bands want them themselves. Brett and I have talked a few times. He's like, hey, maybe we should grab a couple of these things and we'll mix it down and see what the bands think. You know, that's putting Brett out. Brett's trying to make a living doing his own thing too. It's a lot of time to live, you know, mix down a live set, especially for a band you don't know that well. You know,
everything always takes longer than you think it's going to take.
Sure. And as soon as you start going through the review process, you know, oh, can you move this up? Can you move this down? Can you know, edit this, edit that? You know, it could be a lot, tens of hundreds of hours. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I don't want to put Brett out that way. He's a super generous guy. He's a very good friend of mine, and I would love to do that with some of these things, but time is money, especially when you're in the music business. You know, things are not what they used to be.
Nope.
No doubt. Well, I got to say, once we get rolling, time flies, and the next thing you know, it's midnight around here. We did a 3-hour trek tonight. It was wonderful. It was one for the record book. So, Chad, thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Much.
This is great.
Larry and
Mike, it was very good to see you guys. You are two of my my favorite musicians. You both are very fascinating. I could listen to both of you all day. I am honored to say I've worked with you. I like to call you both friends, and I hope to see and talk to you both very soon.
That's great.
So
Thanks, all of you.
Yeah.
Mike, nice talking with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. This was a serious pleasure, man. Really fun.
Thank you all for being part of Soul Night Live number 14. And just want to tell folks what I got coming up next. I got a special Friday night show coming up next Friday with legendary Gentle Giant vocalist Derek Shulman, which is pretty awesome because he's not a guy that does a lot of press, honestly. So there's some new stuff happening on the Gentle Giant front, kind of a collaborative version of Proclamation that they're working on, kind of a virtual thing. And I'm going to get to the bottom of that and a lot more. And then my usual Saturday night show this week, my guitarist or my guest is guitarist Lawrence Juber from Paul McCartney's Wings, that last lineup around 1979 or so. And then the following week, my good friend Baylor Trucks, good mutual friend of me and Mike's, is going to pop in, and we're going to look at the Allman Brothers family tree from the inside. and go a lot further than just that, because Baylor's a fascinating guy on his own. His own music is awesome. So we'll definitely be talking a lot about that. And the following week, we had Dave Kersner with his band in here, including the McBroom sisters, who sang backup with Pink Floyd in the 80s and the 90s. They're working on a new album. It's called Black Floyd. So we're going to find out what that's all about as well. And next month, I think he's tuned in right now. Hey, Chris. Chris Myers from Humphreys and McGee is going to be my guest. We haven't nailed down a date yet, but it's coming. So stick around. This is so fun, and it's just a treat to do this with y'all. So thanks for being part of it. And
Thanks, Sean.
Stay safe, stay strong. Everybody, you're stronger than you know. Hang in there.
Thanks, Sean.
All righty.
See you, Mike. See you, Larry.
All right. Take
See
care.
you guys.
We'll see you
Good
guys.
night.
Good night.